time do we have? Oh, we have. Hello.
Last year, remember that? And we came in, we were soaking wet, and we're like, it was very cold. It was cold. Yeah, we had air conditioning. We had the council. There were a couple presentations, but it was not. I remember I prepared it. I didn't remember what I prepared. Well, I could look it up. I could have done it. You would know the difference. I like being fresh. Apparently there was a large terrorist attack.
Oh, that's right. You think I have great fashion. I don't know. I look like a bum today. This is on. Okay. Let's remove the siddur for now. All right, everybody. Let me introduce our program. Gretchen is here. We have a newcomer. Welcome. And we have, what's your name again? Rachel? Rachel me'Yisrael. Baruch haba. Chag Sameach. Okay, well, this is our Tikkun Leyl Shavuot. We were just in Tzfat, Isaac and I, walking the streets. When was that? Last Wednesday or Thursday? Yeah.
And sadly, we're pretty much the only people there.
Yes.
Our group.
It was like a ghost town.
But to see the artistry of these people, the stuff they're producing, off the charts, incredible.
Incredible place. The mystical center of the world. The center of the resurgence of Kabbalah. Isaac Luria, Chaim Vital, Shlomo Alkabetz, and Joseph Carl, Rabbi Joseph Carl. Anyway, from the Kabbalists in Tzfat, we have our Tikkun Leyl Shavuot. That's where it started in the 16th century. And they were in love with God, and they said, you know what, Shavuot needs some teeth, needs some strengthening, needs some celebrating. And what do we Jews are unique to us? We celebrate the holiday of Shavuot, the Matan Toratena, the giving of our Torah, by studying, by learning. Of course, the Kabbalists did it all night long, till the wee hours of the morning. I used to do that when I was a student. I think with age, it gets hard to study that long. But if you can stay up all night, please do so. The Kabbalists certainly did so, and there's studying taking place all over the world tonight in honor of the holiday of Shavuot. In fact, in Israel, how many hours is it? It's 3 in the morning. They're still studying just like we are beginning. Okay, what we are going to do tonight, we have 5 presenters. Each presentation will last 30 minutes, leaving about 10 minutes for questions and discussion, whatever comes up. And we are planning to have a food break at 9 o'clock. And then Jordan Wallach will continue after that, 9:15. And that will then be concluding. The concluding session will be from 10 to 10:40 with Cantor Taibel. The sessions will be as follows. Looks like Rabbi Weinsberg's. Sarah, good to see you. Who's coming? Is he here? Ah, here he is. Patty, you've been bumped to the regular spot again. All right, I'm just introducing. Nothing's been missed. Hag Sameach. We have the following sessions. The first session with Rabbi Weinsberg is on Jews and tattoos, which I don't have. So am I a sinner or am I okay?
Kosher.
I'm kosher, I'm okay. Oh, well, it'll be interesting. From 7:20 to 8, we have Petty Kahn on the subject Jewish partisans in Belarus during the Holocaust. Lots of research there. Looking forward to that. We're going to have our Shavuot evening service from 8 to 8:15, led by Cantor Taibel. And then we're going to have a little, then we're going to have my session from 8:20 to 9 on the challenge of empathy in times of crisis. Then we'll have our food break. We'll have Jordan's presentation on Jewish geography, which is Jewish geography plus Yiddish dialects and Napoleon's defeat in Moscow. Where you came up with that? Oh my God. How Napoleon gets into this, but we'll find out. And then Cantor Taibel's session on tunes of the synagogue and their mispronunciation. So, without any further ado, Rabbi Weinsberg, I keep forgetting to speak into the microphone. You're on, the tattoo man. Good to see you.
For a minute, I was worrying that you're going to say, without further ado, the tattoo, but whatever. Yeah, Jews and tattoos, there's a handout for you to follow. And like you can see at the outset, there are several reasons I selected this topic. Those purposes are outlined at the outset of the sheet. Namely, just to review how the Torah prohibits tattoos for Jews. Also, the kind of dialogue between the rabbis, arguing several points of view, often contradictory. And then some contemporary views on Jews and tattoos as well. Well, we'll start with the first one. The foundation of the prohibition against tattoos is found in Leviticus chapter 19. That's part of the Torah reading known as Kedoshim. The Parshat of Kedoshim refers to the holiness code among the Jews at the time of Moses. Some of the finest ethical ideals of our tradition are found in that segment of the Bible, and so are ritual items as well as discussions about tattoos. Specifically in chapter 19, verse 28, B'seret lanefesh lo titanu b'v'serchem uktovet ka'aka lo tachanu b'chem ani Adonai. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor imprint any marks upon yourself. One has to say that there are different translations of that sentence. I took a look at Eitz Chaim, which is not this translation, and they, and I think correctly, explicitly refer to don't gash yourself. Don't allow yourself to put gashes in your flesh, nor imprint any marks upon you. Don't create designs on your skin. By the way, how many feel very strongly about that? How many feel like, oh, that's a terrible thing to do, have tattoos? Raise your hand. Yeah, a lot of people do. I'd say half the room. The other half, not so sure, right? And in fact, tattoos have become more and more in vogue in our time. I was just watching something on TV, and the pretty gal, as she turned around there, she had a beautiful floral design etched in her skin. And you see that in every area of society, even in the Senate and congressmen, some people have tattoos. It's not against U.S. law. It's just a question of whether it is in accordance with Jewish law, and if so, when, which is to say, no question from the outset. But nowadays, there are questions whether it's as taboo to have these taboos or not. So we're going to follow that now with this specific reading here. There's a rabbi named Rochelle Tulik. She says, what this means is don't make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead. And when someone dies, don't imprint anything upon your skin. So the context of the biblical prohibition, she correctly indicates, is in reference to the dead. So suppose you want to commemorate someone who died, you can not emblazon that person's name in your flesh. Now, this may sound surprising, but don't forget the ancients, especially in Canaan, had this practice of gashing their skin at various transitory moments, especially when death was at hand. The most famous and most dramatic passage of the whole Torah is in the book of prophets, when Elijah challenges the Baal priests, Baal being the chief god of Canaan, to a kind of duel. He said, let's put wood on your altar, and I'll put wood on mine, and without lighting either one, let's see whose fire lights spontaneously. And you can better believe the Baal worshipers and priests, they prayed that God, the Baal, would do this for them, and nothing happened until they were so desperate, they started literally gashing themselves because that was the practice. When you were desperate and want to appeal to the gods, you do so, hoping he'll have compassion. Baal, by the way, you probably know from modern Hebrew, Baal means Lord or husband. Isn't that interesting? And of course, we know Baalat Habayit or Balabusta means mistress or master, Baal Habayit, of the house. But Baal, the original, was the real deal, the all-powerful God of the Canaanite people. And don't forget, it was that land that the Israelites were going to dispossess, according to God. But ironically, they often came into a situation of assimilation where they started admiring that other God, possibly because they could see this God in stone or made out of wood. It was more visible, more tangible than the God of Israel. We don't know why, but that was the first kind of assimilation in Jewish history, giving over and giving up your own faith for the faith of those who surrounded you. Obviously, the Bible says that's a big no-no. We don't accept it. What's the story with Elijah? When they gave up in desperation, the Baal priests, he did a very tricky thing. He poured a bunch of pails of water on his wood, and it still lit up in fire after he called out the name of God. The duel was over. What was more important is that the Israelites were around the situation, which was on Mount Carmel, those of you who have been to the northern part of Israel. And the Israelites were ready to be persuaded till Elijah managed to show they were wrong. So that's the kind of gashing that is prohibited, according to the Torah, to Israelites. Second section there in the book of Dvarim, chapter 4, it says, Rak hishamer lecha u'shmor nafshecha me'od, just be careful that you don't forget the things which your eyes saw, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known unto the children, thy children and thy children's children. This is a very important theological point of view, which says that which you've experienced, when you experience God at Sinai and in the wilderness, you should transmit to your people, your children, and they in turn theirs, and so forth throughout the generations. The point of view is that what we regard as permissive or sinful is not only what we individuals choose, but we follow a certain heritage, in our case known as Judaism, which says, your forefathers were told not to, you too should not. Pretty strong language and pretty clear cut, you would think, until the rabbis come along. Now you have to know, I say this every year probably, that Judaism is not biblical, it's rabbinic. And so people say, what, not biblical? Yeah, it's not biblical. If so, we would be literalists. And what we follow instead is the interpretation of the Bible by the earliest rabbis onward. And in every generation, as Mordechai Kaplan put it, there's an evolution of Judaism, a transmutation in keeping with our clearer understandings of human behavior, psychology, and what God wants of us. And we'll see that starting with the earliest rabbis who wrote the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the earliest part of the Talmud, basically edited probably with rabbis from about 100 BC to about 250 CE. Could have been easily 500 or more rabbis in that time frame who had a dialogue with each other, not just in the same generation, but from generation to generation. They brought each other's names up, and then they said, oh, there's another rabbi who said this. Now, it's not quite like saying, I have a doctor, I don't like what he says, I'll go to another doctor. It's not quite what it's like. What it's saying is that Judaism is the sum total of the variations of our a sage's wisdom and insights as to what is permissible or not. So we start seeing that here, hakotev, I'll just read the English, one who tattoos, if he writes without engraving, or he engraves without writing, he's not liable for lashes. This comes from the Masechet Makot. Makot simply means lashes. Yes, folks, the rabbis prescribed lashes for those who committed certain sins, including that potentially of engraving a tattoo in your flesh. Now, you could say, did they really lash them? Are they like the current day Saudi Arabian kingdom that lashes people or even cuts off arms of those who steal? Well, of course not. It was as if they could say, were it not for the Roman period in which the Mishnah was developed, that if we had the power, we would lash you. But we don't. So it's all hypothetical. Still, no, that it would be deserving of lashes if you engaged in tattoos. So they seem to say, but they have a caveat, not under certain circumstances. So if somebody writes, or literally engraves themselves without an engraving, without a picture, or he engraves without writing, he's not liable for lashes. In other words, that would not constitute anything close to idolatry, nor would it be a prohibition of the basic Torah writing in reference to the dead. It's only if you combine the picture with the writing, with the name, the words, that person is liable for lashes. Now you see what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the text without changing it. It's true what the Torah says, except, that kind of language. What they're saying is if you're not fully involved in the tattoo practice, it's not such a god-awful thing. Now, they quote Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, who quotes Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, a 2nd century rabbi. He is not liable until he writes a name of idolatry there. As it says in another part of the Bible, Vayikra 19, do not tattoo yourself, for I am God, right? So they're saying two ways to read that verse. Don't tattoo yourself, for I am God. You can either read it as a reference to idolatry. Don't do it because you're putting in some foreign god in your mind at the time, and don't do that because I'm God. Or you could say, you may do so, but what if the name of God is what you tattoo in yourself? You know how some people have crosses tattooed in themselves, and I'm sure some Jewish people have Magen David. Yeah, there are Jews who tattoo. I know because my son is one of them. Right? I'll get back to that in a minute. So they said, not so fast here. It's not a total prohibition unless you reference some form of pagan worship inside of that tattoo and portray it in some fashion. So neither a name, which would be considered potentially idolatrous, nor a picture of that foreign god is permissible. But something more neutral, maybe. Especially maybe if it's the word of God, Adonai, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, in your flesh. Now, some would still consider it a desecration. I'm not saying no, but there's more room for movement here if you want to read the verse of the Bible that way. And you can see what it summarizes. The Gemara, meaning the Talmud, debates whether it's the inclusion of God's name or a pagan deity that makes it a culpable act. In other words, it depends what you portray to say if it's forbidden or not, according to rabbinic tradition. Now you can see that's a big step away from the Torah, and yet it's done in the framework of retaining the sanctity of the Torah verse that was first quoted about the prohibition. This is known as Judaism with a thumb. If you use a thumb this way, you can reason your way out of this way. But the reverence for the text still is retained. We don't lose sight of what the Torah says, even if we give permission, because under certain circumstances, it's not so gefährlich, not so dangerous, not such a big problem. Right? Now, it goes on to say, according to the first rabbi, I'm really reinterpreting what I just said, there's an aversion to tattoos, and that's what some of you indicated you feel, no question. There's an aversion to tattoos, but under less, let's say, under more circumspect circumstances, it's not as big an avera, not as big a sin. Now we go to the point 4. זה יאמר לאדוני אני, וזה יקרא בשם יעקב, וזה יכתוב ידו לאדוני, ובשם ישראל יכנה. So suppose you again use God's name in the text of your tattoo, right? There, you're reaffirming God. And you're connecting yourself to the God of Jacob, the God of Israel, Jacob and Israel being the same, our ancestors. You're actually making use of a name in the Torah in the script of your tattoo, which exonerates you from lashes, from sinfulness, as we would put it in our time. Now, turning to the next page, page 2, which is number 5. Hein al kapaim chakotayich chomotayich negdi tamid, which means, behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. Thy walls are continually before me. That's a proof text that says, look, you can put God's name even on your hands, according to the psalmist, or according to Isaiah, rather, right? Because you're thinking about God and not some pagan deity at the time. See how the rabbis pulled up another verse to kind of say, it's okay if you're really reaffirming your connection to God. And you get the same thing. He sealeth, number 6, he sealeth upon the hand of every man, that all men whom he hath made may know it. So what you're doing is you're boasting about God. You're showing off that God is your source of strength and source of salvation. So if that's what the tattoo does, then the original prohibition need not count. It doesn't mean you can allow it, but if someone chooses to do it, it's not something that is prohibited. We may still find aversion to it, you know. It doesn't say don't do that. You can still feel the way you want to feel. But look at what it says before you condemn it. Okay? Now, you might not think I had this out for you, so you really can understand from the sources of our tradition way back, a couple of thousand years back, they're already debating whether that prohibition regarding tattoos is a strict no-no. If I said this without the text, you would say, Rabbi Weinsberg, you're just a modern conservative rabbi, so of course that's what you think. It goes back. And our rabbis, and of course my good colleague here will verify it time again, anybody who studied Talmud would know how liberal many of the rabbis were, especially Hillel over Shammai. We always had this duality of prohibit, 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 allow. It's called the life of dialogue. That's what the whole Talmud is all about, dialogue between the rabbis. It's only later on that Jewish law develops to say, okay, which rabbi is it? But the source of our tradition is wide open for variance of opinions, even using the same text. That's how ingenious the rabbis were. So if there's any takeaway I want you to get from today's brief conversation, it's that Judaism really stems from a rabbinic point of view, not strictly Torahitic, that allows for variation and deeper understanding and different ways to contextualize what the Torah says. And it's critical understanding of who we are as Jews and what Judaism's all about. Now, I get into a more contemporary discussion with this thing. So why do Jews, and there are many, want to have tattoos? When I say there are many, you can look down at number 8 there. According to a 2007 Pew study, almost 40% of Americans ages 18 through 40 have tattoos. And I just looked at the most recent Pew, came out this year on the same topic among various topics, and the percentage is even higher. And it's certainly higher among adults above that age, meaning our contemporaries. Now you could say, well, of course, because we were having people, even my father before me had a tattoo. After all, he was in the Navy. Not my dad, I'm just saying. One could say. So naturally, if you were a sailor in the US Navy, Jewish or not, very often you did tattoo like your fellow sailors. Why? Because you were identifying with them. He had a tattoo, we're part of a brotherhood. There's that kind of motivation. And it's kind of a point of pride. It's another motivation why you might have a tattoo if you're in the armed services, such as that. By the way, they had a lot of tattoos that were a little more risque than that. So I'm not commenting on that. But certainly as a point of pride, of joint effort in behalf of the United States of America, tattoos were more and more prevalent, starting with World War II, probably before. Okay. And notice right the last comment toward the end of that page, this Rabbi Altshuler quotes a study, and you can take this home and Google it, see if she's accurate, that about 2/5 of Jews' tattoos, when they do put them on, is a way to identify their Jewishness. So you who have an aversion to tattoos, remember it's also an expression of who you are as a Jew for many, not all, probably the minority still, but a substantial minority. Now let's talk examples, okay? This is really where the conversation comes.
You better get near the microphone.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So, has anybody have a situation where you could say, yeah, you know somebody, doesn't have to be yourself, you know somebody who's Jewish and proudly displays a Jewish tattoo, a tattoo of Jewish interest or not? Anybody here? Yes.
Of course.
Can you describe that tattoo and I'll repeat it for the microphone?
I don't need the microphone.
You want to pass it around? Oh, he has a microphone. That's great. We can use a microphone because I think we're on the air.
By the way, did we put the stream on? It's on? Susan did. Good.
What I said was, of course, I know multiple people multiple Jewish people who have tattoos. Actually, when I think about it, and I never did before this, virtually all of them will have whatever else they have, and some have many, but whatever else they have, virtually all of them will have a chai. I see that more than I do anything else. A Mogan David. And those are the two predominantly. What I wanted to comment on from what's here are a couple of things. First of all, going back as far as the beginning of the references, to me they seem diasporic. And by that what I mean is they seem like many of the prohibitions, prescriptions, as well as proscriptions seem to have come about because once we were in the diaspora, the rabbis were finding ways to save us as a people, as a religion, and to save us from ourselves. So this literally talks about making cuttings, engravings, gashings to honor the dead, which was clearly a pagan tradition or other religious tradition. And then it goes from there. And it reminds me of other things that rabbis have done along the way, have done along the way, to say we have to make a specific prescription or proscription because we don't want these things happening by accident because we're spread all over. And that was my sense. The other thing I wanted to say is in your list of second and third generation survivors, children of survivors, looking to replicate, it's really interesting to me because I have a very close friend who is a first generation survivor who is very averse to tattoos, and his exact words are always, we've had enough of tattoos, we don't need any more. So there's that. So yeah, I
Sure.
You know.
I'll agree with you on the last point, which is I find it bizarre that somebody who wants to remember a grandfather who might have a Holocaust tattoo would replicate it. Now, it's kind of endearing in a way, but it's bizarre anyhow. I mean, that's my own, some of you may agree or not, but it's kind of admirable in one way, but it's passionate. I don't feel comfortable with that. But that's me and some of you, I'm sure. Yes.
Yes. So the most Jewish tattoo I've seen says Zaya a Mensch in Yiddish. So that's the most Jewish one that I've ever seen. Second of all, henna. Is henna prohibited the same as permanent tattoo? And do they have a lot of tattoos in Israel?
Yeah, of course, henna is painted on. It can be eventually taken off. Tattoos are permanent, very permanent. Although someone has a comment, and I'll make more comments about that in a minute. Someone else? Yes.
I actually had a quick question. There was a basketball player who has you mentioned tattoos made in affection of a loved one. There's a basketball player who has a tattoo of his deceased mother on his neck. It's of her face. Does that fall into the idolatry because it's of a face, or is it still in the line of love and affection?
Well, I doubt you're talking about a Jewish player?
This is a non-Jewish player, but would that example, if somebody wanted to get...
Well, of course, I want to say something before I answer your question, which is people who are not Jewish do not have to subscribe to any of this.
No, I get that.
So I'm just saying. Now, here's the point. If there's a cross on his neck, some people would regard that as idolatrous. I don't. And most rabbis I know nowadays don't. They see it as a variant of monotheism. And so it would not be considered idolatry, even if he had a cross, let alone in the name of the mother. So, no.
Okay. But it's her face. It's her actual face.
Yeah.
We should answer the question about tattoos in Israel.
Oh, another question? Well, let me go first with you. Yeah.
No is there for tattooing is there. Do you think that's one of the reasons the Nazis tattooed all of our people?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's a part of their psychological warfare, which is to reduce human beings to numbers and then catalog them and all the rest of the ugly stuff we know about. Yes.
Yeah, so I just having returned from Israel, and I'm a observer of the tremendous increase in tattooing in the past decade or two in the United States. That's a separate discussion. I saw very few Israelis with tattoos. It doesn't seem to be something that's permeated into that society, almost to the point where if I saw someone with what I regard, and I'll use the word, a hideous total body tattoo, it's not an Israeli, it's an American. So I don't know, Rabbi, do you agree with that? I saw very few Israelis with tattoos.
Very few, yeah.
There are few.
We saw some of the younger.
Well, pardon me for saying this in a synagogue, but sometimes they wear tattoos in a place you don't want to.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
true.
so
We couldn't see those.
in a place that don't shine, they used to say, right?
It's certainly an issue there. We saw a big tattoo place. What was it? I think in Tel Aviv, a huge tattoo.
It would be in Tel Aviv, yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to make one other point, and that is that there may be some danger now in Jews, American Jews with visible tattoos that are related to their religion. With the rise in anti-Semitism, people are being identified by a Star of David or maybe a tattoo that denotes that they're Jewish. I wonder how many are trying to get rid of their tattoos for that reason.
Yeah, you're almost making it sound like tattoos are commendable. Well, I happen to think there's something to that. Again, our aversion is something we're ingrained with. That's why I asked that question from the get-go. But you can see there's more latitude than you might have originally thought. Yes? Susan? Or somebody else over there? Oh, your hand in front of Susan? Sam?
On the first sheet, the reference to cutting oneself to commemorate the dead, how is that different from our tearing our clothes upon the death of a relative?
Well, that's a fascinating point of view. Certainly some scholars, rabbinic scholars, have said rather than tattoo ourselves upon someone's death, we have developed a far more refined approach of tearing our garments. Now, I have to comment on that because it's done almost in every congregation around. That little black ribbon actually is not the real deal, but we do it because we're afraid to look too aggressive or aboriginal. The real deal is to tear your garment in a place that's not the hem, but where you can't sew it back again, because it's supposed to represent an irreplaceable loss. But look how much more civilized, as you're pointing out, this is, as opposed to a tattoo, where you subject yourself to a lot of pain. Although, by the way, I notice there's a place out in St. Pete's, the Legend Brothers, by the way, tattoo parlor, where they advertise how they have lidocaine preparation before you go in. So, as far as I know, I mentioned my son, the cop, right? When he got his whole arm tattoo, what they call a tattoo sleeve, I was more or less in shock. There's a story behind it, though. I'll tell you quickly what it was. Do we have another few minutes? Or?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
You go till 7:15. We've got at least 6 minutes.
Well, here's the deal. When he was 14, he beckons me into the garage up in the Boston area and says, "Dad, I got to show you something." Shh, don't tell Mom, don't tell Mom. So I'm going in the garage with him, closes the door slowly. I said, "What is it, Dan?" And he says, "I got to show you something." He rolls up his T-shirt, and there is a big triangular tattoo, all black. I said, "Dan, why did you do that?" He said, "Well, I wanted to." And I said, "Well, I can't argue with what he wanted to do. He's, again, maybe some of his peers induced him, who knows what." I said, "But why did you pick that? That's really," and I won't say this in the temple, but it was really ugly. I use one word for this. Really ugly. A big black upside down triangle. What the heck? At least it could have been more aesthetic, is what I was trying to say to him. Well, fast forward, a couple of things going on here. He decided, this is maybe 10 years ago, because he's been a cop sergeant now in Sarasota Police Department for 20 years. He ends up showing up with a whole arm full of tattoos. I was astounded. The first thing I said to him is, "Boy, that must have hurt." He said, "It sure did. Took him 10 days to recuperate." You know, I said, "But what is what is this municipal seal?" He had a symbol of some, like a city seal, like you have at Harvard, the Veritas. It looks like that, kind of a armor with some squares in it. He said, "Dad, that's the municipal seal of the town of Weinsberg, Germany." I said, "Oh my God, how did you find it?" He said, "I looked it up," and I checked. He was right. He decided to ingrain himself with our last name, Weinsberg. Talk about identification, a strong identification with one's name. And then he has all kinds of other Jewish symbols. Chai is one of them, and so forth and so on. Well, fast forward again, about, say, 10 years ago, my son, no, it's more than that, it's 18 years ago. He said, "Dad, you know, I have a new daughter." I said, "Yeah, of course, Mazel Tov again." He says, "Well, I want to spell her name in Hebrew." I said, "Oh, I was so delighted." I said, "Okay, her name's Kayla, Kuf, Yud, Lamed, Aleph." He said, "Oh, great, thanks, Dad." Next time I see him, Kuf, Yud,
On his arm?
Lamed, Aleph, in big block letters. I said, "Dan, I'm glad it was just her name and nothing else." what am I going to do, right? But he did it again as a form of identification, a form of connection, a form of an expression of love. And I, as a pop, I didn't have any choice, so I said, less is sein, you know? So it is, let it be, and so forth. Turns out that at one point, the police department told its new recruits no more tattoos to be displayed. So he said, okay, and from then on, he started wearing a long sleeve shirt, even in the hottest weather, until they relented. So sometimes a source of identification, a source of pride, is something you just have to let be. Even if it were me, I wouldn't have done it. And that's the way it is.
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of things. First of all, it is the practice, I know, of the Shiites, especially in Iran, to gash themselves with chains to make them bleed as they commemorate the death of Ali, who was their great hero, who was killed. And there's always been, throughout the history, I know, a great aversion to the idea of gashing ourselves and marking ourselves. A lot of sources in that. I'm not saying yes or no, but just part of our historical experience. And I think, you know, for me, the tattooing of the victims of the Shoah, the slave labor, was an attempt to dehumanize, to give everyone a number, rather tattoo, like a cat, like cattle. Cattle was tattooed, and the origin of that. So personally, I'm very uncomfortable with tattooing. And besides all that, besides Jewish law and the historical background, I never found it aesthetically nice looking. I don't understand why people do that to their. It's certainly faddish. I remember there was a fellow named Perry Cohen in my first congregation. He used to come to Minyan every morning, and at the Navy he had a huge tattoo. He was so embarrassed by that, though, because he put on his tefillin in the morning, and there was that. He wanted to hide it. He was so embarrassed by that. So it was very rare back then. Always associated with the Navy, that kind of group. But now it's a fad. Now it's very popular. As you said, the statistics are.
Let me give a PS to your comment. The latest Pew report, 2025, indicates that some 14% of people who have had tattoos regret it later on.
14%.
So my son at one point said early on, look, Dad, I have tattoos, but don't worry, I'll get rid of them before I have to be buried. I said, over my dead body. Because look, he'd have to gash himself again or something. I have no idea how you remove a tattoo.
Procedure.
So you got to know that his heart's in the right place.
Of course.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
Question? One question.
Thank you. So I want to kind of, I'm not going to say that I had the idea first because you're a rabbi, but I kind of want to go off of what you were mentioning, the cultural relevance of the gashing and like the skin lesions and the branding. And so on number 1 in Leviticus, I can't help but think that like that really refers to like keeping our people separate from the cultures around us and like studying other cultures and other time periods, the things that they did to their skin. It wasn't like a tattoo like what we see today with modern eyes. So like if you read a piece of literature from 2,000 years ago and you talked about a marking of a skin, they wouldn't think, oh, skull and crossbones with some ink and a needle, because they didn't do that. So do you think that it's possible that a lot of this has been taken through a modern lens versus what it was intentionally, like initially intended for?
Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm sure it's true of any topic. We always look at it through the lens of our understanding, as opposed to, es steht geschrieben, it's written, therefore you should do it. Now that's why we're not Orthodox, clearly. Because sometimes divine fiat is good enough for me with the Orthodox way. And by the way, by and large, that's true for me too, but there are many, many, many exceptions. And the exceptions, of course, make the rule, right? So we have a lot, we are entitled, and the earliest rabbis felt that way, to change the meaning of a text to suit our understanding of our traditions, our prerequisites, what we feel is, our values, what is most important in life. And that's the nature of Judaism, as I said in passing. It's an ongoing development in the light of the written word, but going well beyond. This is a great way to retain your Jewishness without feeling it's irrelevant and, passé, and therefore who needs it? The rabbis understood that in the Talmudic era. I'm talking about the Roman period onward. And we need, that's a precious part of conservative Judaism more than the other branches. Tradition and change. That's been our motto for many years.
Very good. I think thank you very much, Rabbi Weinsberg. My colleague. Did great. No, we're going to do that in the middle when it gets a little bit darker. So our second person, we have a couple minutes. If you'd like to take a break, we're not supposed to start till 7:20. So I intersperse some break time in case we had to run to the restrooms. But if nobody wants to go, we'll go right to the second session. Patty, Kahn, on the Jewish partisans in Belarus during the Shoah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for being here.
A little bit closer to the mic.
How's this?
Great.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. I need it. First, I want to get a better idea what our roots are here, because this story really is rooted in the Soviet Union, like in the 1920s and 30s, in Poland. Do we have people that have roots there? Like I do. Yeah? Where?
A little bit earlier.
Russia?
Ukraine.
Ukraine? Ukraine. Kiev? Me too. No? Okay, anybody else? Where?
Donetsk. Kiev.
Well, this is really interesting how this can segue with Rabbi Weinsberg's presentation on the tattoos, because I'm going to go opposite. First of all, I wanted to write a book after a long time of ruminating. I went to a conference in Kansas City where a survivor of the Holocaust survived in the forest. And it was the first time I'd ever heard a speech like that. And it really did stick with me, to the point that when my time became less busy, like now, being retired from a professor of art education to just doing art, which isn't just doing, I've done writing too, I felt like it was the time. And I Googled, because people were waiting for some big reason why I chose this topic, but I wanted to find somebody that was a partisan, that survived the Holocaust in the forest, and that was an artist. And I did, through Google. So this woman that I found, she died 3 or 4 years ago. Her name was Faye Lesbenik, was her maiden name, Schulman. And she was born in Lenin, Poland, which at the time, the border kept changing. My dad told me this too, because he was in that area, that the border kept changing. So he couldn't tell me Russia, it was Poland, it was Russia. So it was the same for her. There was a river, and some of you might know that river, and I'm going to say it like an American, the Bug River, but it's Boog, or there's even a longer way to say it. What is it? Boog? You were there? Boog? Okay, Boog River. Her family lived right on it, right by it. And so there were the beautiful waterways there, and her family had orchards of pears and apples, and 4 generations of Lesbeniks lived on that land. So it was really special that it happened. But me being a lover of nature, I wanted to pull that in, but I wanted to do a Holocaust story that really had an artist eye, because you don't really see much of that. And that's what I'm going to give you today, but a couple sections. It's going to be a cliffhanger. You're not going to know the end of the story, okay? But I wanted to start off with first Faye in the forest, and she was born in, they think, either 1919 or 1920. Does that happen to anybody? Where it's sort of one or the other? Okay, well, it was that way with her and her family, because she came from a family with 7 siblings, so it was hard to keep up with everybody. And her mom she ran ragged trying to keep up with everybody, so the kids became more independent earlier, like Faye did. She, as a little girl, would play in the forest because their house was right on the cusp of it, so it was her playground. So I'm going to give you a little bit, if you'll bear with me, an artistic rendition of the forest. So in 1929, the sun gradually rises in the silent sky of the early spring, if you can imagine, just right on that cusp before spring breaks out. The fireball appears faintly through the clouds in Poland's eastern sky, because we're on the Polish border there it was Soviet Union and Poland. A few birds chirp, a mournful dove interrupts the silence, yet in the valley of the Bug River, torrents of water from the winter ice melts drown out the quiet. Does that sound like it, those winter ice melts? A hungry white owl soars in the dawn sky as it looks for prey. And okay, maybe a little bit of foreshadowing here or not. It spreads its wings to catch air currents and searches near the ancient Bialowieza, is that right? Forest. In the clearing, he swoops down to catch a gray field mouse on the remaining patch of icy snow. The two rise up in the sky. One glides while the other wiggles to escape the owl's talons. They silhouette against the rising sun, heading towards the owl's nest in the untouched forest. And this is this forest that was ancient, barely touched, unlike the other forest in Poland. So it had a chance to be a thick, dense forest that was really hard to get into because they really didn't use it, except her father did chop down some trees to build their house. And because it was such a dark, dense forest, there were all kinds of superstitions. So when I went to Poland last summer, I saw a painting, and it had the forest, but with a dragon in it. So it was the superstition of the dragons. So in any case, some people are fearful of Poland's remote, not only the forest, but the Bug River. This region is the backdrop for many scary stories, which, this will be fun. One who dares to enter the dark forest might just encounter a huge belly, fire-breathing dragon with flared nostrils. And that's like this painting I saw in Poland. Not all are afraid of this forest. For young Faye Lesbenik, it's her backyard playground. She spends time alone in the secluded recesses of the woods. Most people won't go there, including her friends. However, she visits the forest every day. On this early spring day, Faye arches her neck to look way up through the tangled old trees. She sees icy new buds emerging and dripping water. Spring shafts of light pierce through the treetops and feel like nature's chapel to Faye. Here, she feels closest to the Lord. And I'm going to stop there. I'm looking right at the rabbi here because he's our leader, our spiritual leader. And so that sentence was for you. Okay, so I'm going to change the subject now because I like in writing to do opposites. I mean, we have this wonderful feeling of this beautiful untouched forest. Okay, we're going to do Nazi photographs. We're going to talk about it as an artist. Okay, and our listeners are artists that are in our group. The Nazis handpicked a group of 30 craftsmen from Lenin, Poland to survive. If they got picked, they were going to live, well, at least for a while. Hitler, who was an artist, how many people knew that? That Hitler was, yeah, okay, good. Orders this while thinking they might be helpful to the war effort. The group is made of carpenters, machinists, and one photographer / painter. You know who it is, right? Faye. She was picked. She was alone. They already took her family, and she was with 5 other craftsmen family that got to be together with each other. But for her, she was alone. At this time, she was 19, just separated from her family, and she was ordered to reside, this is really interesting, in a nearby synagogue with the 5 family craftsmen. In 1941, Faye is already familiar with forced labor by the Nazis. For over a year, she's ordered to photograph Nazi officers. She's permitted to leave the ghetto and go to her house, which is outside the ghetto and occupied by who else but the Nazis. So she would work in the photographer's studio that her older brother had built, and she had a whole studio dark room there. They gave her supplies to use. They didn't pay her, but they gave her supplies. They recognized her talent, and they demanded she make portraits of them. So at the time, photography was limited really to black and white. However, one reason why she was picked was she had gone to the university to study how to paint black and white photographs with color. And probably most everybody remembers that time when there were black and white photographs, and sometimes you would see hand-painted colors on them. Faye is among the few that can skillfully paint subtle colors. She learned to paint from her sister, and she took the university class while she was visiting her sister. So Faye needs, let's go forward in the future time there. She needs to call back a Nazi officer. Now, in my writing, it's historical fiction because I used her memoirs, and I researched a lot of context that I wanted to add to it to make it more of a story than a memoir. And I love to research. So what I did was I created a Nazi officer who was a problem. And he moved during the session when she was taking photographs, and it created a small blur in one area. So she had to have him call back. She had to call him back, and he was not happy. No amount of technique could overcome fixing that unwanted blur. So he grumbles, "I don't have time for this." Secretly, he likes to create an air of importance. "Ready?" Faye asks. He gives her an angry nod. He has a scowl on his face, and he twitches while showing some teeth. Faye cannot give him a command, and she tries to think if she can get him to relax his face. Faye spots his wedding ring and asks, "Do you have a wife back home?" "Why do you ask?" "Do you think she might like a picture of you with an expression you use with her?" Fay patiently waits as he readies himself. He straightens his hanging medals, smooths his hair, and adjusts his hat. The Nazi takes a cloth to shine his black tall boots. He knows a good photographer is hard to find. He gives a slight half grin. He thinks his face is frozen for an unreasonably long time, but complies. The Nazi doesn't want his wife to know about all the unarmed civilian Jews he has murdered. He justifies the killing since the Germans are creating a pure race. His eyes follow Fay as she frames the shot. Fay holds her breath, hoping for a good shot. She knows it's hard for him to smile since he's a beast and a murderer. Her fingers are nimble and she quickly prepares. Click. Done, and she exhales. The Nazi rises and briefly pauses to estimate the direction of Berlin. Swiveling in the westerly direction, he painfully raises his right arm to salute. He winces from a previous wound. He automatically clicks his heels together. Hail Hitler! The blood drains from Fay's face. The officer turns around as he glares at her, waiting for her to do the same. Yet Fay remains silent. She studies his pained face and detects a broken pride as it appears the Germans might lose the war. The soldier wonders if he's imagining things after being under the hot camera lamp. He is in full uniform and breaks out into a sweat. He mops his brow with a white handkerchief. The officer quickly exits the room for cool, fresh air. Fay is relieved that he did not reprimand her. Even though he's not in Germany, he could easily kill her for not saying Hail Hitler. As she leaves, he mutters under his breath and clearly says, I'm doing this for my wife. Fay thinks she's spared because the Nazi wants a colored photograph. Is that something that maybe that saved her life? She's secretly pleased that she was able to get the grumpy Nazi at least to make a half-toothy grin. Fay shakes her head while thinking, I'm not ready for these life and death situations, though I have no choice. Fay decides to prepare for the unexpected. Yet Fay questions if unpredictable Nazis can be outsmarted. If not, she would at least die fighting them. She refuses to be, and this was Fay's words, a lamb that is led to the slaughter. Fay knows when given the slightest chance, Jews do fight back. Anger wells up inside of her, but she tries to calm herself. Soon it passes. Fay turns off the hot lamps, takes the camera off the tripod. She folds her camera's leather bellows back in the box. Can you imagine that camera? That old-fashioned camera with the bellows? And checks the lenses and clasps the box together. Fay turns over the open sign and reveals closed sign, pulls the studio blind shut, locks the studio door. It's now time to develop the picture, including the film from the previous Nazi that he gave her. She thinks, I hope these pictures work this time. I cannot spend another session with this beast of an officer. She corrects herself, remembering how her parents taught her to work with difficult customers. Now, I've got one other, but I want to stop a minute and get response from you. This is a manuscript in progress, and it's the first time I've presented anything in public. And if you have any comments, I'd appreciate it before I go on to the next one.
Okay, maybe you'll be interested. I have another story about my mother.
Yes.
And her mother was saved. I'll tell you later.
Okay, you're welcome to share a little bit if you wish.
Okay, my mother was 11,
And my grandma was 20-some now, around 30 years old. The whole family was captured and they were put in the barn. And the policeman, he was from Russians, he came and he said that in the morning the whole people, like all people, will be shot. So he offered to take off this barn to take my mother and her mother only.
Wow.
She was safe.
It gives me chills. Anybody else? Okay. This is working up to her partisan life. That's the cliffhanger that I'm not going to really tell you, but I want you to get a sense of what her life was like before she became a partisan. And I'm starting at 19 years old. Faye Lesbinek escapes the Lenin ghetto. And it happened when, initially, when the war broke out, half of Poland was given to Russia, the other half was given, Germany. And there was also an administrative part too in the middle of Poland. And so she's on that eastern side under the Soviet rule, and she really did okay because she spoke 4 languages, and you probably, I would imagine there are people in here that speak a number of languages, right? Do you? No? Okay. Well, it was Hebrew, Yiddish in the home, Polish, and then Russian. Because she, the kids she would play with on the street, she learned Russian. At home, they spoke Yiddish. And in Polish school, they spoke Polish. And after, they had cheder and spoke Yiddish, Hebrew. So her life growing up until then had been pretty placid, pretty, you know, not too much of the craziness yet. But here I have her running. She's escaping from the ghetto because it's when on the Eastern Front, the Nazis, and the Soviets collide in Lenin. And Lenin was, they don't call it that anymore, but on that border of the Bug River, Lenin was a strategic point. There was a bridge that crossed over. And so that was, you had to go very far down the river, either way, to get over to the other side. So this was her town, and Germans were running through the town and going over the bridge and over. And so she's running from the ghetto to escape because everything is chaotic. And she escapes. There's a sliver of a moon. It happened on a dark evening, which was really helped save them. She wore black clothes and unties her hair, which falls around her pale face. Faye hopes to blend into the night unnoticed. Faye and 5 other families who reside in the synagogue for the past year also take a chance and exit. This select group were chosen by Hitler's men because they were craftsmen. It was probably the only common talent they had with Hitler, who actually was an artist but unrecognized. As a small group of Jewish craftsmen depart, there's a hushed sadness. They realize the immediate threat to their lives as the 2 enemy groups collide in their Polish town called Lenin. The Nazis and the Soviets are at war. The town of Lenin, named after an aristocrat's daughter, Lena, 200 years prior to all this, was a strategic point. Because people think, okay, Lenin was named after Lenin. No, but after Lena. Lenin had a bridge over the Slosh River, which intersects Poland and the Soviet Union. Faye mumbles in a strained voice to the craftsman families, I know the forest. We must hide in the forest. They nod at her as she holds her camera, some of her photographs, and few belongings. A Russian fires a few shots. Now the group is more determined to flee with Faye into the forest. They follow Faye into the ancient Belarus forest. The dense pines and fir trees cover the sliver of the moon, blocking traces of moonlight. The group scatters on their own into the darkened forest. Faye is numb. From the shock of the loss of her murdered loved ones, she gives departing gestures to the group and breaks apart. She's agile and compelled to see her home that her father built with his own hands. It was her parents' marital home where all 7 children were born. Faye reaches the wooded path she knows so well. The edge of the forest reveals the sliver of a moon. There's enough light to stealthily move so not to be seen or heard. Faye knows the Nazis are occupying her family home, but this time she's brazen enough to go there without their permission. During most days, Faye's permitted to leave the ghetto to force work assigned by the Nazis in her family's home where the photographic studio is. Her family home is isolated from other neighbors in a wooden house. Her great-grandparents settled it on unwanted land that was a floodplain. Faye yearns to pick the last bit of apples and pears in their orchard. It was plentiful this year, with many nutrients. She tries not to bring up too many memories because it's better to be numb right now, or it would be too hard to grieve such losses. I'll stop a minute. Anybody want to tell me about feeling numb from the Holocaust? Or anybody that did, maybe it was a response? Okay. She hears the German shepherd named Max give a bark as she comes closer to the house. She can't avoid stepping on the crisp fall leaves. Faye sees a light go on in her house. The kitchen curtain opens and a stranger looks through the window. The forest hoot-owl screeches under a cloak of dark night. The dog barks, the owl hoots together in a chorus. Faye has a bad feeling. A Nazi half-dressed in a uniform top and in pajama bottoms bolts out of the door with a rifle and a huge flashlight. A bright focus light slowly scans the yard. As the shepherd growls and pulls at his chain, annoyed, the man pulls Max's chain collar so tight around his neck he can hardly whimper. The Nazi yells, "You no good idiot guard dog. It's just an owl. You woke me up. I'll shoot you right now." With that, the Nazi hits the dog's side with a rifle and lets go of the chain. The dog gasps for breath and growls and bares his teeth at the Nazi. While the Nazi's attention was on the dog, Faye moved closer in and then waits. The man goes back inside. The curtains close, the lights are turned off. Faye takes a deep breath. From the cover of the forest, she then hurls a small chunk of precious dried meat to the shepherd. He catches the flying nugget in the air and woofs it down his throat. Max licks his lips. He lowers his head to the ground and slowly approaches her on the edge of the forest. Faye pats his head, then licks the wound on the side where the Nazi was. And I'm going to stop there. Are there any more comments on that? Okay. How are we on time?
You have 10 more minutes.
Okay. Dan?
What do you think was the reason she wanted to go back to the house?
Okay.
If it was hard for her to get out of the ghetto, you think she'd go in the woods and look for safety there?
Well, she was, but she wanted to see her house again. And actually, she not at that time. She does go back when they're not there. And she just wants to see what they did to it. And there were all kinds of they were interrupted from what they were doing because there was some shots, and so they left the house. But there were potato scraps. They had just been peeling potatoes. And I think also maybe it was just like a homing pigeon, that she needed to have that contact. She lost her parents. She lost, of the 7 siblings, 5 of them. The other 2 were her 2 older brothers who were sent to forced labor camp. So I think it was just to feel her roots after such tremendous loss. Are there any other questions? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you so much. Is this, it's coming. We'll take a short break. We'll light candles. We'll have a 15-minute Mariv service to welcome Allah. You know, in Shavuot, you're really supposed to wait until it's totally dark because of the 49. You need the 49 full weeks of the Sfirat HaOmer. But so we're hedging a little bit, but that's why we postponed our service till later. So let's take a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back here, and we'll have our Mariv service, Kiddush, and then we'll start with, and we'll have our third session on empathy.
Thank you,
All right.
Rabbi.
Not yet. I have my session, and then we're going to go. Yeah. You got it. Will be read. 10:30. course.
Good. How are you? How are you? I'm alive. I'm not happy with what's going on in this world.
None of us really are.
You know, Colorado had, did you hear about that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah. There was a big attack on a Jewish group in Boulder, Colorado. I don't know all the details. Setting fire to people.
Done. I mean, it's an incredible story. Incredible stuff. Okay, let's begin. I think we'll, out of a little bit of a twist, I'll light the candles. Everybody rise. Let's officially inaugurate our holiday with the lighting of the candles. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahadikner shel Yom Tov. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shechianu, kiyamanu, v'gianu, lazman hazeh.
Amen.
Now it's official. Chag Sameach. We remain standing, everyone. We rise for the call to worship. The Baruch Hu. On page 39A, I believe.
Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam.
Baruch Adonai Yavorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Please be seated. Baruch atah Adonai. Page 39A.
Ma'avir yom u'mevi layla, mavdil ben yom u'ben layla, Adonai tzeba'ot shemo. El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, hamali v'aravim.
Amen. Page 40, Ahavat Olam.
Ahavat olam beit Yisrael ahavta. כי הם חיינו ויורך ימינו, והם נגי יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אלוהי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושבתך ובקומך וקשתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Page 42. והים שבו תשמעו מצוותיים ונתתי מצארצכם בתויר ושאתם ועבדתם אלי האחרים והשתחוויתם להם ושמתם לדבר האלה שאתם אותם להודייתם וכתבתם וכתבתך בישולח למען יובלים ושפתך ושמיים לארץ. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור דבר אמרת להם ויעשו להם ציצית על כתפי למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
אדוני אלוהיכם, amen.
Read on page 43A. It's going to be the core text of my presentation. So let's see what's essential about the blessing after the Shema. This is our enduring affirmation binding on us that Adonai is our God and there is none other, and we Israel are God's people. God is our sovereign, redeeming us from earthly rulers, delivering us from the hand of all tyrants, bringing judgment upon our oppressors and just retribution upon all our mortal enemies, performing wonders beyond understanding and marvels beyond all reckoning. God places us among the living, not allowing our steps to falter, and leads us past the false altars of our enemies, exalting us above all those who hate us. Adonai avenged us with miracles before Pharaoh, offered signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. God brought Israel from its midst to lasting freedom and led them through the divided water of the Sea of Reeds. As their pursuers and enemies drowned in the depths, God's children beheld the power of the divine. They praised and acknowledged the name. Page 44.
ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם, משה מרים בני ישראל הכנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדע בקודש, נוראתי לא תוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה, זה לי ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי פד אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Ashkivenu, page 45. Ashkivenu, Adonai l'shalom, v'amdinu l'kem chayim, u'frosan eskadosh v'lecha, v'takni b'tzat tova b'efanecha, v'shin leman shemecha.
ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Amen. Please rise, page 46.
וידבר משה מודה אדוני אל בני ישראל יתגדל ויגדש שמי רבה ואלמד בקהילותי והמלך מלכותי בחייכון ובמכון וחי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה וברך לעולם עולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח יפה ותמה ויתנשא ויתנדב ותעלה ותעלה על שמי קדושה בריחו לעילה מכל בחרתה ושירתה תושחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
Silent Amidah for the evening of Shavuot begins on page 306, silently through page 314. Kaddish Shalem, page 54.
יגדע וגדע שמי רבה ועלמד בקהילותי והמליך מלכותי בחייכון ובמכון וחי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ועולמי עלמיה יתברך
Yibarach Yishlavach Yibar V'Tama V'Naseh V'Tadav V'Talev V'Talal Shemei L'Kurisha Berichu Ne'ela Mikol Bechata V'Shirata Tushchata V'Nechemata Damiran Be'alma V'imeru Amen Tikabal Soton V'Oton D'Cha Yisrael Kol Davon V'Shmaya V'imeru Amen Yesh L'Maraba Mishmaya V'Chaim Alev Koisa V'imeru Amen Osei Shalom Imamav Yosei Shalom Aleinu V'Koisa V'imeru Amen.
Please rise, everyone. Page 79, the Kiddush for Erev Shavuot.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafein.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'am ורוממנו מכל לשון וקידשנו במצוותיו ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה מודים לשמחה חגים וזמנים לששון את יום חג השבועות הזה זמן מתן תורתנו מקרא קודש זכר לציון מצרים כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל עמים ומועדי קודשך בשמחה לששון הנחלתנו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל והזמנים ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Page 56, Alenu L'Shabbat.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שעונת השמיים ויוסד הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו בדעת היום והשבות הערב אביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד
כי לך כל פרק ישבח לשם.
ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
Please be seated. Mourners and those observing yard sites, reciting the Kaddish in memory of our loved ones on page 58 together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba v'yamad yivarach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yamechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala v'izman karev v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach v'elam v'lomei maya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitada v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei Kedusha Brechu Leila min kol bechata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran bi'ama v'imru amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Let's conclude on page 62, Yigdal.
יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח נמסר עיני את המציאותו אחד אין יחיד כייחודו נעלם וגם מצוף לאחדותו אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף לא נערוך אליו קדושתו קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו אינו אדון עולם וכל נוצר יורה גדולתו ומלכותו שפע נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו לא קם בישראל כמו שעון נביא ומביט את אמונתו תורת אמת נתן לעמו אל על יד נביאו נאמן ביתו לא יכל לפעל ולא ימיר דתו לעולמים לזולתו סופר ויודע סתרנו מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו גומל לאיש חסד כמפעלו נותן לרשעה כרישתו לשלח לקץ ימין משיחנו לפדות מחלקי קץ ישועתו מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו ברוך הדיין שם תהילתו מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו ברוך הדיין שם תהילתו.
Chag Sameach. Now it's official Chag Sameach. All right, let's go right into session with the rabbi. And I hope you enjoy this. I gave this a lot of thought. And I tried to think of a topic that really got to the essence of the holiday, which is Torah, the revelation of Sinai. Why it was so unique. And of course, I could speak for weeks about all kinds of different topics, but I wanted to talk about what I believe is the core of the Torah, and that is empathy. And especially during these times of crisis, there's a lot of tension in the air in the United States, in Israel, Jewry worldwide, the world, even in our synagogue, and perhaps in our personal lives. So, the first question is, what is empathy? What is empathy? And in the various studies, definitions, if you look it up, it is considered to be the highest form of human communication, the deepest form of human understanding. And empathy, to make it even crystal clear, is not just understanding someone or something else, but the ability to feel, almost transfer, to see what someone else is feeling. That's what empathy is all about. When you get out of your own shoes and you enter into the shoes of someone else. It's called, in one study, the highest form of social intelligence. Some people have that ability and others do not. For example, a lot of the main examples used when someone is suffering, not only we just have sympathy towards the sufferer, we empathize with the sufferer. We get into that person's actual needs. One of the great tests of empathy is when someone is, that we know is caught doing something embarrassing. We don't just have feelings, regrets, or whatever they are. We actually empathize with those who are, we feel a sense of embarrassment as well. This personal connection is what empathy is all about. And in the various studies that I looked at, it is clear that not all human beings have the same capacity for empathy as friends who are empathetic, who feel when we're angry, or whatever our feelings are, that really feel the way we feel. That's empathy. That's being an empathetic human beings. human being. And in Jewish tradition, we have countless number of dictates and laws that allow us to improve our sense of empathy towards our ach, our achot, our brother and our sister. Now, what is very interesting, as we've defined what empathy is what is the state of empathy, for example, just in the United States? And there are a lot of recent studies, and it's shown very clearly in the data that there is a decline in empathy. Some scholars even feel there's in the last decade or so, a 40 and 50% decline in the human quotient of empathy. It's a very complicated study's been done, but based on what I just shared with you, 40, I'm taking the conservative view, 40 to 50% decline. There's an empathy deficit. Now, what's so interesting is that two profound speakers, scholars, one Jewish, one not, said that empathy is the key to the success of any society. Adam Smith, the Scot, who really is considered to be the founder of capitalism, said the only reason why capitalism can work is by fulfilling the human quotient of empathy. Otherwise, this great system of capitalism cannot succeed. Baruch Spinoza, who eventually became Benedictus Spinoza, a great Jewish thinker from Amsterdam in the 17th century, he basically said the same thing, that with all of Jewish laws on which he came from and commenting on natural law, whatever, he said the key ingredient to any society, whether there be laws or not laws, religion or not religion, is the ability for a society in trouble especially to increase its empathy towards others. Love and caring when they're missing, no matter what political system we have, as we all feel it. Without that which we Jews have been teaching for generations, we are in decline. So there are 4 explanations as to the cause for a decline in empathy. I'm summarizing a lot of different studies that have recently been done. The classic answer that you see in most of the explanations is that it is because we're a digital society. I call it the technological explanation of the decline in empathy. People are glued to their phones, their computers. We're not seeing each other. We're not talking to each other. It's a serious problem, especially with the younger generation. They're clued into themselves. So how are they possibly supposed to feel, have any empathy towards their fellow teenagers or whatever? That's why there's a huge increase in teenage suicide, because there's a detachment. When there's a detachment in the human realm, then there's a decline in empathy. And some said it's because of the rise of technology. And you have to get rid of that technology to some degree in order to see a rise again in human empathy. That's why Shabbat becomes important, because we get rid of the technology. Think of the genius of Jewish tradition. We get rid of the technology in order to make sure that we never get lost from each other. That's what coming to synagogue, and that's what being Jewish is so much a counter to the modern technological age. Cell phones, major distraction. Therefore, many research have said, therefore, decline in human empathy. Then there's another layer to the explanation, and this one I would call the tribal explanation. And this was also highlighted by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and I'm trying to remember which book it was from. I think it was from God Has No Name. I forget which book from Jonathan Sachs, but he references a major study that was done with a group of students who were watching someone experience suffering. It's like those experiments, you know, when suffering's inflicted on other, the Milgram experiments or whatever. And there was a certain degree of empathy when you see a certain person, another person suffering. Sympathy, perhaps some degree of empathy. But it's very interesting when they did studies to show that the person who's being afflicted is from a common background, educational background, cultural background, social background, perhaps religious background. The ability to feel, to have empathy, then increases exponentially, which means that we tend to be more empathetic towards those of our kind. In fact, today we're just talking about the assaults against Jews in New York. Don't wear a kippah, don't wear Jewish. This is a new decree in New York City, attack against Jews, remembering the hostages in Colorado. So this scholarly opinion, or this sociological view, says that empathy is in a sense poison, real empathy, poisoned or restricted by our own particular group, social, educational, culture, whatever. When those people are different than we are, we tend to have less empathy, which is logical, really. It makes a lot of sense. And therefore, it makes it much more difficult to be empathetic towards people who are different than we are. And in many ways, researchers show that because of this, what's called this tribal explanation, or the particular explanation, empathy can be a very good thing among the group, but very bad if it closes us into our own particular groupings. You follow that? So in other words, the decline of empathy, therefore, to this second theory, is that we become too enclosed in our own group, and we're not able to see the best in others. In other words, our unique stature or place in society in many ways traps us within our own group, and therefore we have the rise today when this grouping gets too narrow of chauvinism, racism, sexism, you name the other expressions of hate that have become very prominent today. So that is almost like a paradox of empathy. The closer we get inside ourselves, we feel perhaps more empathy with our own, but less empathy towards those who are different. Nationalism, religion are being assaulted in many ways. And that's why Vladimir Lenin, in the beginning of the 20th century, in his commentaries on Marxism, said that we should disallow all religions and particularisms and only have a universal Marxist, Leninist revolution that will dissolve all differences, because group narrowness makes us less able to feel, to have a successful society. Now, what is so interesting about this view is that Jewish tradition disagrees with Lenin completely. It says that in order to know the feelings of one who is different, you have to remember that you were Gerim Heitem Be'eretz Mitzrayim. You have to remember that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In order to have empathy towards the stranger, we have to remember, because we're a minority, we have to even delve deeper into our own tradition, which is the exact opposite of this very common scholarly feeling about the dangers of narrowness or parochialism. And this idea that through our own particularism, being part of Israel, part of the Jewish people, is why emphasis on Shavuot is the most dominant idea in the entire Torah. 36 times, 36 verses in the Torah tell us about memory, about remembering we were slaves in the land of Egypt. Every time we recite the Shema, that third paragraph, remember you were brought out of Egypt to belong to your God and to your people. It's the dominant idea. Because you're a minority, you will have more empathy. It's the exact opposite of what Lenin said. Now, what's so interesting about this focus on our oppressed background in order to develop our empathy and empathy towards others, it's very interesting. There's no Jewish holiday, think about this, that celebrates triumph. We don't have a holiday that celebrates Joshua's conquest. We don't have a holiday that celebrates Solomon even, we refer to it on Shmini Atzeret, but there's no special holiday that tells us of Solomon's grand building of Jerusalem, or the power of the Davidic Empire back in the about 3,000 years ago, the greatness of David. We have no holiday that marks that. We need to remember those things, but it's interesting, Jewish tradition does not celebrate them. Instead, the Torah emphasizes our weak background, our weakness. Perhaps that's why all of our major holidays, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, occur outside of the land of Israel. Before you had power, Pesach in Egypt, Shavuot at Sinai at the beginning of the journey, and Sukkot, the journey through the desert, all of them to remind us of our weakness. And in fact, all of our rituals, I marked down here, tefillin, wearing tefillin in the morning. In the 4 portions that are placed in the tefillin, they're all to remind us that we were slaves in the land of Egypt. The mezuzah, the parchment we put on our doorposts, the sections from the 2 passages in the Shema are also references to the Exodus from Egypt, the Shema, the Kiddush. Every time we recite the Kiddush, we not only do remember creation on Shabbat, but we also remember the Exodus from Egypt. It's almost as if what I want to share with you is this obsession with what occurred in Egypt. It's the glue that binds everything in the Torah, and the question raises why. Again, to emphasize that when you have what you have to work real hard on remembering your background in order to nurture the virtue of empathy. It doesn't come from remembering powerfulness. It comes from collective memory of remembering we were slaves in Egypt, in the Exodus from Egypt. So the Torah cultivates this idea, which is so basic to who we are, to remember the other. And of course, it's not only to remember the other who are not Jewish. The 2 times, v'ahavta recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, Jew and non-Jew, in order to emphasize that you have to, ki ezrach mikem, you were strangers, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's the core of the holiness code in the book of Leviticus. So everyone who is different than us becomes core to the Torah element. And Pesach is so unusual, because what do we do at Pesach? We eat. Not only do we relive slavery in Egypt, we eat it, experience it. We're all supposed to see ourselves as if we were slaves in the land of Egypt. We are obligated to recite the story from Egypt, memories about shrinking the distance between us today and our past, because if we lose that past, we won't be able to have the, as the Torah says, the proper empathy towards other people as we should. It's the exact opposite of Lenin and Marxism. You don't become more empathetic, according to the Torah, by dissolving our uniqueness. You become more empathetic by becoming more engrossed in the Torah. The more Jewish you are, the more you can feel empathy towards the other. That's what Elie Wiesel always taught. Remember seeing his words, that through the voice of being Jewish, I'm able to be the most universalistic of all. But if I cut out that Jewishness, I can't feel what I normally would be able to feel towards all the suffering in the world. That's why Natan Sharansky always said, when we blow the shofar, we blow from the small end that makes the noise through the wider end of the shofar. You can't blow the shofar from the outer end and get any sound at all, which is the very tragic nature of assimilation, acculturation of so many young Jews who leave Jewish tradition, they thinking they're going to be more universal, but in fact, and this would be an interesting discussion to have, they become less so, less empathetic towards others. That's what Jewish tradition would say. So Jewish tradition says that we should not separate ourselves from our Torah, but we should be more connected to our own story. That makes us the most wonderful part of being a human being, to feel the pain of others because we experience the powerlessness of the past. Now, there is another part of this I want to delve into a little bit. I'm running out of time here. But that comes from the book of Job. How much time, what time do I have here? Where's my, oh, here's my schedule. No, that's the old one. I can't find my schedule now. Oh, well, what did I do? Oh, it's probably over here. I just want to make sure we're on time. Here it is, to 9 o'clock. Okay, we're still fine then. Okay. The book of Job. It's one of the classic Jewish texts. See, I didn't get there right away. The book of Job. Another explanation of the decline of empathy. It says in the opening verse of the book of Job, which is one of the great pieces of literature. Yet Job, ish haya be'eretz Utz Iyov shemo, v'haya ha'ishahu tam v'yashar, v'yirei Elohim, v'sar me'ra. That Job was a man who lived in the land of Utz. I don't know where that is. Job was his name, and he was that man, Tam. It's the only description of anybody in the entire biblical text. Tam means absolutely pure, inside and out. V'yashar, he was straight going. V'yirei Elohim, he was God-fearing. V'sar me'ra, and he turned from all evil. This man was absolutely perfect. He was the perfect man. And of course, you know the story. Bad things started to happen to Job. He lost all his wealth. He lost everything he owned. He lost all of his children, 7 boys, 3 girls. They all died. And then he became ill. And then 3 friends, with the narrative in Job, came to comfort their friend, led by Eliphaz. He was the leading of the 3 friends. And they went to see Job. And it says in the text, they could not even comprehend they did not recognize Job. He was absolutely a destroyed human being. And they started weeping with him and reacting to his sorrow. They tore their garments. They sat in the dirt together. They sat with Job on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and nobody said a word to each other. They were all completely silent because they saw his suffering. There was nothing. He had these very close friends. They were present with him, which is the beginning of a great description of empathy, being able to see the pain of another human being. And you don't even need to comfort anybody with words, just being present. That's what Shiva is all about, by the way, just being present. You don't have to speak, just be there. So after the 7 days, it says in the text that Job started talking to his friends, and he cursed the day that he was born. He said his life was absolutely miserable. And he proclaimed, he said, I did nothing wrong. I did absolutely nothing wrong. And then his friend says, well, how can you say you did nothing wrong? Maybe you're not such a tzaddik after all. All these terrible things happened to you. But Job responds, he says, I am a tzaddik. There's no claim whatsoever that anybody has on me. Bad things happened to me despite the fact that I was completely righteous. God, he said, will weigh my behavior, and God knows I'm a Tom. I am pure completely of heart, morality, everything. He knows that I am blameless. But then his friends say, you can look at the 9th chapter, Eliphaz says, but wait a minute. God judges everybody rightfully. Everybody's created by God. All the laws of God are fair. And another friend says, therefore, Job, you might think you're a Tom, but you're really not. You're not the kind of person you think you are. They felt his pain, but they were trying to explain the reality to Job by saying that you're not so great in who you are. And Job responds, saying, my friends are betraying me. These are not friends at all. When I needed them the most, they started preaching to me through their ideology, their theology, and the words that were shared, the beliefs, began to divide them. And Eliphaz even gets more strident. He says, you are, in fact, not only are you not blameless, you are evil, Job. There are no boundaries to the sins you must have created, because there's no person who could lose what you lost and be any good. You're corrupt. It gets worse. You are corrupt. You're the exact opposite of your own description of yourself. In fact, they say you must have robbed the poor. Now he's a thief. He's a complete scoundrel, and on and on. And then as Job is suffering, they say you suffer from hubris and arrogance. So the question is, what prevented Eliphaz, this dear friend who at the beginning was empathetic towards Job, what made him turn so rapidly to turn against his dear friend? Job wasn't corrupt. He knew that. And the problem is that often theology, ideology, can interfere with the blessing of empathy. To recognize that God does not control all the world, that life is not so simple that God rewards and punishes based upon our, whether we do good does not necessarily mean we're going to be rewarded for that. Or it doesn't mean that goodness is, that when bad things happen to good people doesn't mean that it is God who's doing that at all. So because of their ideology, this is the third section, technology, tribalism, and ideology, theology. His friends started seeing the worst in Job because they were so trapped in their ideological confines. You think of all those people who hate Jews, they have an ideology. They are so rigid, whether it be their socialistic background or Islamic extremism, their ideology is trapping them. They can't empathize with another human being any longer. And so Job, in a sense, is a challenge to the ideological trappings that confine us in our inability to see other people and to be able to respond to that. They saw the worst in him because of their belief system. And I just mentioned some of them here. Free Palestine, Marxism, Islamism, feminism, socialism, climatism, I don't know if that's a word, vegetarianism, liberalism, you name it. Isms can blind us to true empathy because we're stuck. We're stuck. Now see, that's interesting about the Torah and Judaism. It says because of your ism, you're not allowed to do that 36 times. Remember, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So Job calls upon us to look beyond the scope of our own ideology and theology that blocks empathy, which is a major part of our problem today in society. And then the fourth challenge that I mentioned to empathy is the political climate going on today. Two people who simply think that the other person's wrong, your opinion's wrong because I'm right and you're wrong. We hate others because of their political views today. It's getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, Many have said that the polarization in the United States is the worst it's ever been since the Civil War, when the country was divided between slavery, the slavery issue. But it's happening all over in the world now. Political exchange is becoming much more difficult. And when you have that tension in politics, I'm right, you're wrong, empathy goes out the window. Now, what's the Jewish response to that? Talmud. We had reference to, we're rabbinic Jews, we're not biblical Jews. And we're supposed to study. Why are we supposed to study on Shavuot? We're supposed to keep the halakha, but when we look back at rabbinic sources about what to do with tattoos or whatever the subject is, the uniqueness of rabbinic literature is that there are arguments about what Jewish law is all about. Hillel, Shammai, Bahu, Rav, Shmuel. Major disagreements throughout our texts. And I like to call the Talmud, when we study, that's what's so great about rabbinic discourse, it's a canonization of disagreements. And Hillel was so humble, it says, even though most of the law went according to Rabbi Hillel, that the requirement was to read first the argument of Shammai before you got to Hillel's argument. Because in Jewish tradition, rabbinic tradition, you have to hear the other person when it comes to disagreements. What's interesting, in Roman law, when you read the codes of Roman law, all the disagreements about the laws are completely cut out of their codices, or the codex of Roman law, but not in the Talmud. In the Talmud, we're left with arguments only, Hillel versus Shammai. And the intellectual life of that is supposed to feed our behavior. It's very interesting. There's an argument in the Talmud, I forgot where it was, where after the law is decided in the Gemara, I forget which rabbi says, now I want you to go out and find 150 reasons why the side that was rejected in the law. And that became part of the discourse of the students who argued so positively for the side of the law that ended up being law. But that is the beauty of Jewish tradition, of rabbinic Judaism, to respect the arguments of the other person. What has happened to that art, that ability to really empathize in a discussion about the major issues of our day? I believe that Shavuot and what I've tried to share with you about empathy makes sure that our hearts and our minds are elastic, and this is the ingredient, humble to understand what others are feeling and believing, and to find reasons why our own beliefs are untrue. I think we discussed it on the bus, that would be such a great thing to do, to take the opposite viewpoints, exactly the point here, the opposite viewpoint, and argue the opposite viewpoint so that we can truly understand the other person. It's called radical listening, replacing judgment, which I think the Shavuot, Tikkun, Torah is all about, with curiosity in exploring different worldviews and not letting tech, tribalism, ideology, and politics interfere with that great component of the Torah. Can we improve? This is also important in our own personal relationships. The great admonition in Pirkei Avot, Al tadin et chavecha ad shetamod b'komo. Do not judge another person until you have been in his or her place. It's one of the great standards of empathy. Empathy requires more work than ever before. And we Jews certainly need to know that. Remember, you were slaves in the land of Egypt. To heighten our listening abilities, our understanding abilities, and feeling for the other. That's why the first letter in the Torah is what? A bet. You can look it up, Bereshit. And the last word in the Torah, Yisrael, the last letter is a lamed. You put lamed and vet together, what Hebrew word do you spell? Lev, heart. Without the heart, without the empathy, we'll have more crisis. We need to develop empathy. And that's what I wanted to share with you on this Shavuot evening. Any questions or comments here? Oh, we still have a few minutes. Any comments? Yes. Wait, we have, where's the mic? Here it is. Oh, that's not it. Where happened to the mic we were using? There we go. Okay.
Yeah, getting to the heart of the matter, I'll put it as an accusation. J'accuse. We Jews in this congregation and elsewhere have not sufficiently said, oy vey, look at the loss among Jews, Israel in particular, and also look at the loss among those innocents of Gaza. Why don't we seek both with equal determination and outcry? Because it's just like when the Egyptians drowned. God said to the angels, stop rejoicing.
Nothing, I certainly didn't sense any rejoicing. I think it's a given that we Jews cry for the unnecessary loss of life anywhere. It's kind of a given. But, for example, I know that one of the synagogues, I won't even mention who told me, they do a prayer on Shabbat for Israel, the victims in Israel, and for the victims in Gaza. And I don't think that part is particularly appropriate, because when we're with our family, we don't mourn for everybody else if we have a loss. We're with our own people. And that doesn't mean that we're excluding the suffering of others, but I think it's not always equal. In World War II, I don't think there were many Americans who, of course, it was tragic, the loss of Russian life and German life and Japanese life. But we were focused on America, the defeat against evil there too. But that doesn't mean we celebrate the loss of others. And there shouldn't have been one loss of any Palestinian in this conflict. None. It didn't have to happen. So I don't think that Jews have to be singled out, trying to articulate this, that someone has to lecture us about feeling the suffering of others. I saw that all over Israel. There's not one person who paraded and said, isn't it great that they're dying? That's not part of our tradition.
Well, one part of our tradition surely is not that we are universal. I mean, I never accepted the notion of universal brotherhood, but I do affirm the notion of universal cousinhood, especially when it comes to our Middle Eastern neighbors. And it seems to me that we are remiss, not saying we're not celebrating, but certainly not acknowledging the suffering there, which is as onerous as the suffering in our family, because they are extended family, humanity, as you say.
Sure.
If you empathize with the rest of humanity, there's still something wrong in this picture.
I think that's one of the things that we have to start telling the world, that there's nothing that pains us more than anything, that we've had to go to war in order to survive against another group of people. This is not something that we relish or look forward to at all. It is painful. That's why every Passover, it is so meaningful when we drop, symbolically the wine on the plates, because there's nothing to celebrate here. It is horrible. And the ones who are most afflicted by the terrible war are those, if there are, the group of the innocents who have suffered enormously because of Hamas. They shouldn't be in that situation. And it does pain us because we're Jews. Exactly what we shared. Yitem Gerim Be'eretz Mitzrayim. You were slaves in the land of Egypt. Anyway, it's an interesting part of how we balance, our pain that we feel, our empathy for our own, expanding that, being empathetic to others. Isaac.
There are some situations where we
There are some situations where we have to be very careful how we communicate that empathy. And one of them is when we're consoling the bereaved. One expression that I used to use that I don't anymore because I think it's totally wrong is the expression, I know how you feel. That is an absolute no-no. You cannot possibly, if that's your expression of empathy with someone who's lost a loved one, you've got it completely wrong.
It's shallow.
You cannot know how that person feels just as they cannot know how you feel when you lose a loved one. So I think communicating empathy, one has to be very careful with the words that we use.
Absolutely, you're right. And it's a real art for people know when there's an empathetic other, when we're at loss or mourning, whatever it is, and superficial comments.
You said something very important during the Shiva. It's best to say nothing.
Best to say nothing.
Your presence is your sign of empathy with the people who've lost a loved one.
Exactly. Are we have 2 minutes. Hold on.
All right, then last
I
question.
hope everything's set up there. Joel.
Yeah, then our last question.
It's not exactly a question. And my concern is how Judaism focuses on Tikkun Olam. But I think we're at a time in history now where we have to focus on Tikkun Yehudi.
That's right.
And we have to protect ourselves and
There's
put
the
the Jew first. And when we have our house in order and we can exist in the world, then we'll make room for the others. Alan Dershowitz, I'll paraphrase him, last week said, he will no longer donate to any charity that is not of Jewish origin. And that's where we belong now as well.
He's absolutely right, and you're right. There's times when we can be universal and times we have to focus on our own family, and our family is hurting right now, our people. And that's exactly the point I try to make, that the Torah says you can't feel be empathetic to others until you're more Jewish. We're losing that, and we know that our young people who are not connected with their Jewish souls and lives are going to be less empathetic to others in the end. And that's really the key. We have to be more Jewish, not less Jewish, in order to fulfill the importance of empathy.
Yes, Joel, I take your point, but we will never stop the Tikkun Olam where we provide humanitarian aid around the world, even to our enemies. Even when Turkey had its massive earthquake, and Turkey's not a friend of ours, we provided aid to them.
That's right. We saw the doctor with the Israeli groups in Haiti and Turkey and all over the world helping other people. So the more intensively Jewish we are, the better we will be for the rest of the world. And we all know that. Elie Wiesel, read his writings on it. They're absolutely spectacular. Okay, I hope I introduced a good topic for us and try to, thank you, put Shavuot in its core. So we're going to go next door for 15 minutes, and then we're going to hear about Yiddish. All right, Abyssal Yiddish. So let's go next door. We'll have some refreshments. Okay.
Just grabbing mine. No, that's mine. There was another thing that was mine.
It could be.
Another schedule. That right there is mine too.
Okay, we're a little bit.
That was good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like the whole concept.
Well,
of it.
that's what we're missing.
You know, it was funny when he was just saying, Isaac is right, you don't say, I know how you feel. It's more thinking to yourself, I know that you feel. I understand that you feel. I understand that you're hurting. I understand that you're, but that was right. Someday I want to do a little talk sometime on kashrut.
Yeah.
Hello? New Shalom Aleichem, everybody.
Where is everybody? Come back in. Hello, hello, hello. It's 9:20. Come in, everyone, wherever you are.
Rabbi, I think this is it. So I'm very
Did a lot of people
optimistic,
leave?
And I also want you to
Oh,
know
all right.
that blessed are the brief. So first of all, I want to say a Shalom Aleichem to everybody, that everybody should have a Git gebencht, a Yontif, sonst eine Gesinnt, und mit der Leben und wachsen und Git die Sachen. What are you pointing at? Oh. Well, I'll move around a little bit and I'll try and fix that. I want to give everybody a good Galicianer greeting and wish everybody a milcha dicke shvius.
That roast beef was really
a milcha
good.
dicke
Jordan.
shvius. But that's only part of the bracha. That's only part of the greeting. The greeting goes, you should have a freiliche Purim or Purim. You should have a Purim, right? Yeah. You should have a Kusher Pesach.
Yeah.
You should have a Milch Shvius, and you should have a Fleischig Dicke Tisha B'Av. Now, why a Fleischig Dicke Tisha B'Av?
Tisha B'Av, because?
Well, you don't eat on Tisha B'Av, and most people haven't eaten meat for either 7 or 21 days. So it's an odd bracha to make. It's an odd greeting, except for the fact when Mashiach comes, it says that we're all going to eat flesh on Tisha B'Av. So
Okay.
that's from where this greeting comes from. So, you know, before I go on, I very rarely have any original ideas. I'm constantly reminded of that fact.
No. that's
And
not
much of the source material, certainly the maps, and I have, if anybody's really interested, I have copies, about 20 of each one of the maps except the big map of Europe.
That was from David. Is that the map
And
from David?
this all comes to us by way of Professor David Katz. And David Katz is probably the singular, the leading foremost authority on Yiddish dialects, the extent of,
That's right.
well, he comes to us, and it's no knock, okay, but he's a Litvak. He comes from a Litvische family, and he lives in Vilnius.
We were in
for
his
about
at
a
home.
year. We were at his place. It's like a library. It's crammed with 10,000 books. So, and when he's not living there, he vacations in the north of Wales. So, you know, kind of odd though. I mean, you go from Vilnius, so we were there in May, and it was still freezing cold in the morning.
Was it? I don't remember.
And the sun didn't set until like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. So you would think that maybe somebody might go to a warmer climate other than the north of Wales.
Not him.
But that's where he is. You should find his videos. They're on YouTube. He's a very big sponsor of a group in Melbourne, Australia called Kadima. Now, Kadima is a big Yiddish society, and they sponsor lectures often from their headquarters in Melbourne. But it's interesting to note that places like, let me ask this, how many people are active Yiddish speakers?
Come on, everybody.
How many people?
Abyssal Yiddish.
No, in this group. What do you mean in the world? I'm talking
Abyssal.
abyssal. So how many people grew up with a parent that spoke primarily Yiddish?
No,
Primarily Yiddish? Or
Grandparents.
Or grandparents? Okay.
Grandparents.
All right. So,
And they would, of course,
right,
that was
that's why you had to
standard.
learn it in self-defense. So,
Of course. Are you cold? You're cold.
One of the. So one of the interesting, the part of the topic of my discussion is called Jewish geography. So, you know, our version of Jewish geography is, oh, I'm from Chicago. Oh, did you go to this shul? Did you know this person?
All the time.
Or I'm from, you know, Orlando, and so that's one version of Jewish geography. The other version of Jewish geography has to do with the linguistic differences between Northern and Southern Yiddish. And that's Northern and Southern Eastern Yiddish, because we're going to talk in a little bit about a dialect of Yiddish that's vastly ignored. It's ignored because it's extinct. Nobody speaks it anymore. And we're going to tie in the causes of why Western Yiddish disappeared and why the Jews defeated Napoleon at Moscow. So I know that sounds like a stretch. I have some professional skeptics here, but we're going to give it a try. So whose family came from the south, like Polisha, Ukrainisha? From where? From Vanatastigemen, Ukrainish, Eastern Ukraine or Western Ukraine? Eastern by Russia? All right. I'm from Tarnopol in middle Ukraine. It's not too far from Lvov. So, yes, Kiev? Okay. Poland of Polisha. All right, so what I wanted to do is, on this, I'm very sorry for the Zoom people. Okay, so I don't know if everybody could see this. Could you help me? It's a bifold. Kelly was kind enough. Here, where I'm going to put it on the easel. So Kelly was kind enough to get me an easel, and then there were two easels out there which I appropriated. All right, so this first square over here, this represents the map of Poland. All right, I'm trying. Work with me here. It's a tough crowd. You must all be Litvaks or something. Our God's frozen Jews. So anyway, oh, no disrespect intended. So this is Sephard. So this is Spain and Portugal. So there's an interesting Yiddish variant. I'll say it now because I don't want to forget about it. There's a Yiddish variant. So Sephardi Hebrew, when it comes to the ayin, so the ayin is supposedly a silent letter like the aleph, but it is only when it's at the beginning of the word. So when it's anywhere else, it's a vocalized epiglottal stop. And a vocalized epiglottal stop goes like this. So words like Yaakov. So I grew up a kid, so this person's name is Yank Frank from the shul, and this person's name was Yankala. And my Zeta, when he used to daven, he used to say, Moshe Merashas Kehilas Yankov. And when we davened, he would say, Yanse Shalom, Oser Shalom B'mravhu, Yanse Shalom. So from Vanatus to Kekimen, now how does Yankel and Yankov, where does it come from? So there's a theory that the Sephards, the Sephardim, migrated up toward Amsterdam, and there was a very large Sephardi transplanted, and that they brought with them Yankov and Yanse, and that they brought that with them up until to a part of Western Yiddish, and it became acculturated or assimilated into that language, and then spread east, because most of the people that say Yankov, they're like my Zeta, from Eastern Europe. Not too many people go, most people say Yaakov. All right, so then here is how Jews wound up in the middle part of Poland, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. I love that name. I love that it's a duchy. So anyway, we got expelled. We got expelled from England, then we got expelled from France, and then we got expelled from Germany. So, because up here in the German areas, this is an area called Ashkenaz. So those Jews, they got thrown out and expelled, and there really wasn't far to go. So they wound up congregating in Poland and in Lithuania. And so this map has a description of all of the different dialects of Yiddish. And they include, if you look to the west on the map, there's a whole section on Western Yiddish. And then you'll see what ultimately evolves into the North and the South, kind of like the US all over again. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the linguistics. So the difference between Litvish and Galiciana or Ukrainish or Polish, it wasn't just that it was a language dialect difference. There were oftentimes some very deep-seated opinions, one about the other. And there were significant, shall we say, public relations problems that accumulated between them, particularly because if you ever go to Vilnius, you're going to go to hear about the Vilna Gain. And you will hear about the Vilna Gain from the minute you step off that Baltic Air tin can airline that we flew on until you leave. This is the Vilna Gaon place here, and this is the Vilna Gaon grave over here, and this is the Vilna Gaon's first burial place. The most interesting thing about the Vilna Gaon is that he's buried with the righteous tzaddik. The righteous tzaddik. And who's the righteous tzaddik, and why is he buried with the Vilna Gaon? So it turns out that back in like the 1600s, there was a Lithuanian nobleman who had the poor vision of converting to Judaism. And, this apostnish with the Lithuanians, they did not like their noble people converting to Judaism. So the nobles got together, they sent somebody one time, and they said, will you please repent? And they went a second time, and he said no. And the third time, they burned him at the stake. So who was left to sweep up his ashes and his body parts but the Jews, which they did. And ultimately, when they buried the Vilna Gaon, they decided, let's put this guy in next to him. It's a good story. But the Vilna Gaon, they were very, very not nice to the Hasidim. They were the Misnagim. And the Misnagim would put a ban of cherem, a ban of excommunication on the Hasidim. And that ignited, probably a centuries old, like today, still today. When you talk to the Hasidic rabbi, he doesn't have a effusive praise for the Vilna Gaon. And honestly, there's not such a great foothold of at least Chabad in Lithuania. I looked around when we were in Lithuania. There was a Chabad place, but it was hidden on the side underneath a bridge. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about, so that we could know where your family came from. So bread and butter, right? So who says Brot mit Pitte, or who says Brot mit Pute? Pitte. Anybody? Any Puters here? Okay. Brot mit Pitte is Galiciana. Brot mit Puter is Litvish. Who says Gesinnt and who says Gesund? Zu gesund. Who says Gesund? That's Litvish. We say Gesinnt. Who says Genuk and who says Genik? Genuk, Genik. Genuk is north, Genik is south. Purim and Purim. Who says Purim? Purim is Galiciana. Purim is Litvish. Fun. So this is one of my favorites, okay? My father, may rest in peace, he grew up in his world, you either Peninsula or Nicht Peninsula. So that means either from us, or part of us, or not part of us. So that was his way of explaining that the person wasn't Jewish. But it was a metric that he viewed the entire world by. So we'd go in the store and maybe go, Nicht Peninsula. Okay, so if you said Peninsula, that's Galicianer and Ukrainish. Also, Boruch, and Boyrich. Boyrich is up north, Boyrich is down south. But so I used to go with my Zeta. I went with him to shul in Williamsburg, and so he used to schlep me to where old Jews prayed. So I used to listen to Baruch Ato Adonai Eloheinu, these real heavily accented Torah Tzivu Lana Moshe. All right. And then we get to Guten and Gittin. Guten is up north, Kumen Kimmen. Oh, who benches Lecht? Do you bench Lecht or do you bench Licht? Licht. That's north. Lecht is the Galicianers. A Kluger or a Kligger? A Klugenisht? It's a sarcastic way when you say a Klugenisht. So Kluger is northern and Kligger is southern. So one thing about Western Yiddish is that it's extinct, and one of the things that it leaves us, or just, not too much, a couple of things. Anybody know about a shibboleth? A shibboleth. So it's a linguistic concept of where it self-identifies a group. So the first shibboleth was in Judges, and I think it's chapter 12, verse. So they tell this guy, this hayseed, who's going to one of the Yemite places, I don't know where, but they said, the password is shibboleth, so you have to say shibboleth. So they said, what's the password? And he went, Sibboleth. Well, they cut him into 100 pieces because he had the wrong password. So here are a couple of things that are like shibboleths that are left over from Western Yiddish. So I say, Nicht daher, nicht dahin, nicht geflogen, nicht gestoigen. In some parts of Yiddish speakers today, they say nit, N-I-T. Nit daher, nit dahin. So they drop that SH, and that's a self-identifier for people in certain locales where this holdover. If anybody knows somebody named Simi or Sima, so in Simcha was Sima. That's how it was pronounced because they dropped the CH. So the leftover variant for that is Sima as a girl's name because it's the female from Simcha. So that's where Sima comes from. And I think the last one is Shabbos. And I don't know if you ever, little old Jews, they go, Getzabas, and they drop the H. I mean, that's what the old guy, he would go like this. But he would say, Getzabas, Getzabas. And that was a shibboleth from his little area. All right. So, hurrying along, because I said blessed are the brief. Let's go. Why did Western Yiddish disappear? Why did Western Yiddish disappear? Western Yiddish disappeared because of the Enlightenment. which was a large movement, and in the context of was the Haskalah. So when I was going to regular conservative Hebrew school like 60 years ago, that was like a good thing. They were talking about the Enlightenment, Haskalah, and that it was liberty, equality, fraternity, that it was a wonderful movement, and it all sounded great, but it was bad for the Orthodox. It was really bad for the Hasidim and the clans of Jews. The dynastic Jewish families was not a good thing. And so they characterized the ultra-Orthodox, the Agudas, they characterized them and called them the maskilim. And they really feared this progression that they saw as it was going to be sweeping through Western Europe or all the way over to Central Europe and then finally to Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. So, okay, so how is it that Napoleon got defeated at Moscow? So it's a little bit of a jump, but bear with me. So Napoleon had to find somebody, because he's going to Russia, he needs to find somebody that can speak Russian, somebody that can speak Polish, somebody that can speak Lithuanian, somebody that can speak Yiddish. So they needed somebody. So they found a man who was in the interpreter business, and his name is Rabbi Meisels. So Rabbi Meisels goes, and Rabbi Meisels was originally from Vilnius, and he was originally a follower of the Vilna Gaon. He was a big misnagid. But then he had a conversion in his heart, and he became a chassid. And so Meisels was drafted by the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, to go to Napoleon's court to work as an interpreter. And from that interpretation, from him hearing all of the plans, so he relayed them back, and ultimately the whole idea was for the Russian Tsar to be victorious, because the ultra-Orthodox, they cast their lot with the Tsar. They did not want to see Napoleon. And so I just wanted to, because this probably says it better than I can, but I want to give credit to Chabad because I got it off their website, not shockingly. Okay, so they talk about Rabbi Moshe Meisels of Vilna, and it says he served as a translator for the French High Command. Reb Shlomo Zalman had charged him to associate with French military officials to attain a position in their service and to convey all that he learned to the commanders of the Russian army. Within a short while, Rabbi Moshe had succeeded in gaining the favor of the chief commanders of Napoleon's army and was privy to most of their secret plans. It was he, Red Moshe, who saved the Russian arms arsenal in Vilna from the fate which befell the arsenal in Schmitz-Nien. I actually looked for Schmitz-Nien on the map, and it's there. It's like a stone's throw from Vilnius. So the footnote to the article that may have some actual historical significance is that Rabbi Shneur Zalman actively supported the Tsar against Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars, both on the celestial level, intervening on high for a Russian victory, and by down-to-earth methods such as the Hasidic spy of our story. Reb Shneur Zalman was of the opinion that while Napoleon plans for emancipating the Jewish community may bring respite from the harsh czarist decrees and improve material conditions, this is all but the glittering veneer of forced assimilation and spiritual genocide. The Rebbe's contribution to Russian victory was recognized by the Tsar, who awarded Rabbi Shneur Zalman descendants the status of an honorable citizen for all generations. 5 generations of Chabad rabbis were to make use of this special standing in their work on behalf of the Jews of Russia. And they took use of it because they all went to prison sometimes for religious purposes and sometimes for not. But anyway, I said at the start, the blessed are the brief, and everybody, I think, knows what happened to Napoleon at Moscow, because, you know, he's like watching the calendar, it's like October, he's in there, and they're figuring that they're going to be able to live off of, well, he didn't know, but it was organized that everybody in Moscow left. They burned everything down. They destroyed all of the stores, they destroyed all of the wheat, they destroyed everything. And Napoleon rolls in, and he's got nothing. And then it comes wintertime, and he's stuck. And it was a miserable time. Anyway, that's really all I have. I want to say thank you very much to everybody. Speak us in. One thing about the survival of Yiddish as a language. So you may know that I work at the Public Defender's Office. Not the most Jewish place in the world, okay? I mean, our leader, Larry Eager, is Jewish, so we have a few. So I train lawyers to go out into the world. So I give them the gazints. So they come to me before they go to court, and they say, can I have the gazints?
Gazints.
The gazints is the Zai Gazint, the B Gazint, the Or Gazint, and Kim Gazint. And then they say, can I have the Tovs? And I give them the Tovs. And the Tov is Seichel Tov, Lev Tov, and Shem Tov. So if they're doing that here, there's hope for Yiddish yet. Thank you.
Terrific. Anybody, questions, comments? Thank you, Jordan, our Yiddish expert here. Really? Huh.
Jordan, I'm not exactly sure what I learned, but I loved every moment of it.
Thank you, Stan. All right, I'm just.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Didn't know. It's weird.
The same thing with the haircut.
They kept their hair. Wow. David Katz. That was some evening we had with him. That was unbelievable. All right, Cantor, we can go right into your talk.
It's a little bit far away. Feel free to come back up if y'all want. We can surround it a little bit. It feel a little far away from y'all. That might be a good idea. We can take a minute to tear down, and then I'll hop out.
Ooh, getting tired. I'm getting all this in. Huh? Oh, of course, this is by bedtime. I didn't.
All right.
Fresh.
Hopefully I'm gonna be out before the 10:40. I'll try to be out as soon as possible, guys. So I want to start off with a little story about when I was a kid in Houston. So my grandfather tells me, actually I wasn't even a kid, it was fairly recently, like in the last 5 years or so. My grandfather calls me up and tells me about what happened to him in shul one day. He's become a very capable shot in the years since his father passed away, and this is about 10 years ago. But when he was just starting out, and I'm sure this happened to all of us, as he was saying Ashrei, he noticed a guest of Orthodox background kind of look at him sideways, my grandfather was curious. So he goes to the rabbi after he's finishing davening. The rabbi tells him, well, there was a reason that guest was looking kind of funny at you. At Mehulal Meod, you said Mehulal Meod. So instead of blessing people, you curse them. But it's happened to everyone, including myself. So if you've ever been on the bima, you may not be laughing. But it's still, it just goes to show how pronunciation can affect our tefillah. And in my 5 years in cantorial school, it was a massive emphasis from our staff. However, as we kept going along, I kept hearing this phrase that some of our teachers used to say: there's some battles you just can't win. What did that even mean? I didn't even know what that meant. So by this, they meant some congregational tunes are just too ingrained to make any sort of change in pronunciation. And by the end of this talk, we'll have gone over some of those tunes. So that's a little loud. I will encourage you to get your sidurim ready. I hope to give you some of the reasons why you shouldn't worry too much. Worry enough to get the words, but you shouldn't worry too much about it. Let's start off with, there's a text from Peninei Halacha that says the following. Approximately 3 generations ago, with the beginning of the gathering of the exiles, a need was felt to consolidate the diaspora communities and to restore the Jewish nation to its Hebrew language. For unification purposes, the Sephardic pronunciation was chosen over the Ashkenazic pronunciation. Even though Harav Kook had many other poskim, are of the opinion that each ethnic group must preserve its own accent in prayer. In actuality, since the spoken Hebrew and the Hebrew that is learned in schools is Sephardic pronunciation, the Sephardic accent became embedded in the prayer service too. Indeed, many leaders of national religious educational institutions, acting in accordance with the rulings of a few rabbis, instructed their Ashkenazic students to pray with Sephardic pronunciation. However, in practice, most rabbis do not encourage their students to change their pronunciation, or cantors. Since the Sephardic accent is just as acceptable as the Ashkenazic accent, and everyone is used to it, there is no obligation to return to one's original accent. Moreover, if the effort to change one's pronunciation will disrupt their kavanah in prayer, it is preferable not to change it. Let's take a minute and let's dissect that last phrase. If the effort to change one's pronunciation will disrupt his kavanah in prayer, it is preferable not to change it. By this, we can kind of digest that if there's going to be an effort to say, change the pronunciation in a melody, maybe we shouldn't necessarily do it, right? Let's turn to page 151 for El Adon. Now, here's a little bit of trivia. Who can tell me what a meteg is? A meteg. A little line, exactly. It's a little line that tells us where to accent the word. So keep your eyes open for a meteg. And if there is no meteg, it is assumed that the pronunciation is at the end of the word. So 151, El Adon, and keep your eyes out for metegs. El Adon al kol ha'ma'asim baruch umvorach befi kol neshama godlo. Ooh, wait a minute. But there was no meteg on godlo, so it's godlo. Godlo vetuvo, again. Godlo vetuvo male olam da'at utvuna sovevimoto. We're seeing a pattern, right? We're seeing a little bit of a pattern. Hamit ga'e al chayot hakodesh v'nedar bechavod al hamerkava zechut umishor lifnei chiso. You seeing the pattern here? Chesed v'racham lifnei kevodo. Yeah. So I'll stop there. Y'all get the big picture. Let's try doing it with the correct pronunciation, if you will. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch umvorach vefi kol neshama golo vetuvo malei olam dat tutvuna sovevim oto. See, it's a little tricky, right? It's not how we're used to singing it, right? Let's go to Sur Yisrael on page 158. Sur Yisrael, all right. Let's see if y'all can spot it. Sur Yisrael, kuma be'ezrat Yisrael. Y'all see where it is? Sur Yisrael, kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, ufteichenu mecha Yehuda ve'Yisrael. We didn't have to change that one. Go aleinu Adonai tzevaot shemo kedosh Yisrael. And then we don't have to change the chatima or the ending. But there's a flow. There's a natural flow in music when a melody is written, it is composed with that specific meter and time in mind. So when we change the pronunciation, it kind of disrupts the flow of the text a little bit. Even if the text isn't necessarily correctly pronounced, it disrupts the flow. Like, for example, let's go to Aleinu on page 205. Specifically, there's one line. And can anyone tell me what that line is? Oh. Ooh, that's a good one. That's not the line I'm looking for. Yeah, but that's not the line I'm looking for. I don't know if you've ever seen Friends, but that's a reference to that. Specifically, I'm looking at Vanachnu Korim, right? Vanachnu Korim umishtachavim umodim. Vanachnu Korim. We've never sung that, right? So, naturally, the flow's kind of disrupted from the musicality and from the text itself. Now, actually, I'm going to do this with. Now I'm going to pick on Karlbach here. Turn to page 21. Mizmor LeDavid. There's quite a few of these. Shlomo Karlbach is an incredible composer, and his melodies are still done to this very day. Because there's so much kavanah in it. But if you change the pronunciation, here's what it sounds like without the pronunciation change. Mizmor LeDavid, Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Havu l'Adonai, Kavod va'oz. Right? So now here's with the pronunciation change. Mizmor LeDavid, Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Havu l'Adonai, Kavod va'oz. Ay. Right? There's a certain musicality to Havu l'Adonai instead of Havu l'Adonai. You can change it up to make it fit within the meter, but at the same time, it's not what the composer originally wrote. It's not the intention, the kavanah of what was originally written in the music. So, actually, to further my point, I'm going to do one more of these.
I'm going to do Yom Shabbaton, which is on page, and this is a Zmira, Zmira, and not necessarily a prayer, but the same concept applies. So this is page, I believe, page, Yom Shabbaton is on page, Yaribon, so Mishalo. Let's do Ma Yedidut, which is on page 7, which is on page 83. Let's go to page 83 for Ma Yedidut. So, 83. Y'all there? Excellent. Ma Yedidut menuchatech ad Shabbat hamalka v'chein narut likratech boi chala nesucha. Right? Ma Yedidut menuchatech. It's, yeah, instead of menuchatech, menuchatech. It's a mouthful. But that's just some of the examples. So, why is it that these texts have, quote unquote, incorrect pronunciation? If it is our responsibility to maintain true to the text and say the right words, what is it about congregational melodies that bucks that traditional idea? The answer is simple. Kavanah, intention. As long as one has intention and we can understand what is being prayed, the preciseness of the pronunciation can, and maybe even could, take a back seat. Because if in our minds we can hold the meaning and the intention of the text, we not only understand the tefillah on a personal level, our intention becomes a central part of our focus. Obviously, words themselves should be correct, but the pronunciation in certain cases, the accent on the syllables, aren't the most important factors. Kavanah, intention, is the thing that will set our tefillah apart. Even more in that line of thinking, there are countless studies of how music affects, music affects prayer, not just in the Jewish sense, but in even outside of our faith. And even Luciano Pavarotti said that music is the best expression of one's self. It is the ultimate expression. It is the ultimate way to express emotion. I'm paraphrasing, but it was my high school yearbook quote, and it was years ago that I had this one, but his point remains the same. We can express ourselves, if we can express ourselves that way through music, then it only enhances our prayer. And if we want to put our intention into prayer, what better way to expressively enhance our prayer than through music? More so, and I'll leave it at this, I want to bring up the concept of nusach as well into this and relate it to having it be different nusach. We're going back into Peninei Halacha. A person who practices according to one nusach and prays in a place in which most of the people are praying in another nusach is permitted to pray as he wishes. If they decide to follow their own customs, they should not make their different minhag noticeable. But in their sense, while in the kahal, if there's one prayer that is being davened that they don't have in their head, they should absolutely have that prayer in their head, in that composition in their head that makes them feel most at home. And ultimately, it all comes back to comfort level. If we can apply this to the way we daven and sing here, ultimately, if we have a way of connecting us to the text that brings us closer to God, we should ultimately be able to do it freely. That's pretty much all I have to say. Don. Oh. I'm typically the one that does this.
Well, this problem is going to happen a lot. There's a natural tendency, tension between the music and the words, because music that accents on the downbeat, on the first beat, and the majority of the Hebrew words have the accent on the end of the word. So you're constantly going to be tugging from one to the other. One of the, is it really a question of the words wrong fit the music better, or is it a question of this is what we're used to? And one of the examples I thought you might give was in the Shachri's Kedusha.
Yes.
Az b'kol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmi'im kol. We're used to singing the last four words, every one of them wrong. Adir v'chazak mashmi'im kol. Well, not kol, it's only got one syllable. But if the way I sang Adir v'chazak mashmi'im kol, it sounds weird because it's not what we're used to. But what if we had learned it correctly from the beginning? It wouldn't sound weird.
In a way, yeah, but it also wouldn't be technically if that is what the composer did, or even if that is what the composer did, it would sound weird to that composer. So there's always like a chicken before the egg type of argument that you could make, in a way. That also, by the way, I'm not too familiar with that melody, but I see your point in that. There's so many interesting layers that can go into this argument that can create like a chicken and egg effect that really make this a totally fascinating debate to have. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, well, somewhat related is when you're reading Torah.
Yeah.
What's most important is the words.
Right.
Right? And, if a person gets all the words right and makes mistakes in trope, as long as the phrasing is reasonable, there's not an issue.
So
and same thing, the rabbi reads all the ones each week where we don't have, where nobody else volunteered for it. We don't expect him to get all the trope right, but we expect him to get the words right.
I'm actually so glad that you said that. I do agree with that sentiment in a way. I do agree in that sentiment, but there's, I was explaining, I was just having my lesson today with one of my students, and she said, when I basically explained that trope serves four purposes: melody, punctuation, phrasing, thank you, and that, yeah, melody, accentation, phrasing, and meaning and understanding. So each one of them serves a different purpose, but yes, the most important are phrasing and text. But that's also, in a way, why we have the gabbai, in a way. To be able, like the gabayim, to be able to, if we mess up on text, we have them right there to tell us, in a way. Yeah, no, but I do agree with you that
But one could make the argument that if the words are most important in the Torah, they're most important in the prayers too.
In a way, but then again, there's also that is the way we feel and the intention that we have the more important aspect of it. So ultimately, it's a debate that'll probably never end. Yes.
Another easy example of what you've been saying is En Kelohenu.
Yes.
There are a couple of us leading services who you will hear an emphasis on Nodeh, Baruch, and Atah, as opposed to Nodeh Eloheinu. It's Nodeh Le'Eloheinu.
Exactly.
And instead of Baruch, it's Baruch. So that's where the accent is. And I mean, I think part of that difference is between Ashkenazit and Sephardic. You know, as much as this is the way you learned it, we learned the way we sing it because we are of a certain age that you talked about the transition of learning. I mean, we even have somebody who leads services here who, I mean, I can't believe that we still allow him to daven in Ashkenazit. Who could that be? And so that's from our generation.
Yeah.
Most of us transitioned in Hebrew school to Sephardic, even though sometimes when I'm davening silently, I'm still davening in Ashkenazit because that's the way I learned it and memorized it in Hebrew school and whatever. So I think that could be ultimately a generational difference, that if my kids, when they were in religious school, if they were being taught by teachers who had the proper accent, accenting the proper syllables, then they've learned Nodeh, Baruch, and Atah, and that's the way they'll be singing it, and that's the natural way, you know, for them. So,
but
anyway.
But in a way, also, it was interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that. In a way, that also, but we pass things on to our kids in a way as well. That's also another interesting topic, is would we be able to pass things on to our children, and would they take from a little bit from Hebrew school, and would they take a little bit from what we pass on to them when we daven in shul? So there's that aspect too, is the Ledor Vador aspect, not only just through schooling, but through minhag and through family.
My question is simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, does that change the meaning? Because
No,
okay.
not in these cases.
I just wanted
There's
to
only if you're like saying like a chet or a chaf instead of a hey, you know, like I mentioned, me and my grandfather used to do this all the time when we were just starting out learning how to daven. And we'd mess this up all the time, and we'd kind of have the same tendency. We'd accidentally curse people when we blessed people. Mechulal versus mehulal. I mean, but in these cases, it doesn't change the meaning. So good question. Thank you.
Yeah, remember that Hebrew pronunciations changed through the generations.
Yes.
So Ein Kelohenu, that melody, probably dates somewhere in the 17th century. Those accents were appropriate for the time it was written. Our emphasis on the latter syllable is really something that developed mostly from the Sephardic community, and with the universalization set by the great Hebrew scholars in Jerusalem to standardize pronunciation. But as Jordan mentioned very beautifully with pronunciation of Yiddish words, it was the same for Hebrew, and there's nothing wrong with Ashkenazic Hebrew technically as opposed to Sephardic. It's all part of the way things were generally passed down. For example, the tav without a dagesh in the middle was pronounced th originally, and then became s. Linguists are much better in explaining the phonetics, but so you had Torath became Toras, Ms, Emeth, and things like that changed with Hebrew. So there's no right and wrong here, except we try to standardize with modern Hebrew, but I like the variety when I hear Don Dov.
Exactly, yeah, exactly to Rabbi's point. There is no right and wrong. As long as the intention is there is not really right and wrong in this sense, but the intention is the most important thing.
Absolutely. All right, I think Thank you very much, Cantor. Very good. We're a little bit early, but that's okay. I will see you tomorrow nice and early, 9:30. The 10 Commandments. All right, everybody. I am all of a sudden I got so sleepy. That's the problem. I'm not. I propped up like 5:30 in the morning. I couldn't go back. That's why I'm tired. I'll get there. What did they say? It's like 1 hour a day. Are you right back in the day?
I got up on Friday, unbelievable man, slept 14 hours straight, which I've never done, 14 hours straight. I'm not giving my prostate.
You were so zen.
I'm still not